Chapter 19. It was still snowing heavily outside the cave, and a thick layer of ice had already formed by the river. Few people in the tribe went out. If you stood outside and looked around, all you could see was white. There was a fire in the cave and the atmosphere was different from before. After the ice was installed, the cave was much brighter, and there was no need to feel the cold wind. This feeling was very novel to the children in the cave, and they were in a state of unusual excitement for 2 days. They sat around the fire, looked at the words on the stone wall, and discussed with each other. Xiao Xian wrote the words on the animal skin scroll left by the old hunter on the stone wall. During the day there was light coming in, so he could see the words on the stone wall clearly even without the help of a fire. After learning these, the old hunter would not have to teach from the beginning every time he came. Unlike the others, Xiao Xian stayed in the stone room for 2 days, except for when he was eating, and carefully wiped off the stone powder on the stone wall. Xiao Xian had moved the sundries in the stone room to another place, and the paintings on the stone wall took up a large area. When he finally finished cleaning the last corner, Xiao Xian stood up, took a deep breath and stretched his sore limbs. He took a few steps back and looked at the paintings on the stone wall with the help of the light coming in. The light was not very bright and some of the paintings were not very clear. Xiao Xian still had to use the torch to see clearly. In addition to the paintings in the 2 places that Xiao Xian saw at the beginning, there were other paintings that surprised Xiao Xian even more. The paintings on the wall also involved farming and animal husbandry. There were people working in the fields, people driving the sheep with whips. There were people wearing fur coats and holding small and fancy wine glasses, people standing on boats and casting nets to catch fish, and groups of women picking vegetables with baskets in their hands. There were even some people riding horses. There was also a painting of an adult running with a child on a horse. Next to it was a painting of a battle or a hunt. This painting was longer than the others and took up almost half of the left wall. In front of the painting there was a tall horse, and on the horse was a warrior with a long feather ornament on his head. He was obviously stronger than the others and his head was held high. He looked very imposing and should be the leader of these people. Behind the strong warrior, there were several horses galloping behind him. There were also some wolves? No, that's not a wolf. Compared with Caesar, the animals in the painting had long and curled tails. A few of them even had their tails curled upward. Is it a hunting dog? Some of the hounds opened their mouths and stuck out their tongues as if they were panting. 2 of them tilted their heads to the side as if they were listening to someone. There were also some buildings in the background of these paintings. These buildings were taller and bigger than the ones Xiao Xian had seen in the tribe. Although he had heard that the houses in the mountainous area were much better than those at the foot of the mountain, Xiao Xian simulated it in his mind based on the information he had heard. Even the houses in the mountainous area were not as big as these mansions in the paintings. His sight returned to the painting he saw at the very beginning. The woman in the painting was wearing an accessory on her head, but it was not as simple and crude as the accessories worn by women in the tribe today. Instead, it was more delicate and exquisite. As for the jar she was holding, if those jars were not stone jars, Xiao Xian thought of a possibility: pottery. How long had these paintings existed? If it was about the same age as this stone room, it should have been hundreds or thousands of years. Thousands of years ago there had been animal husbandry, breeding and other agriculture, fishing and pottery. There were also many different kinds of hunting tools. There were even hunting dogs, which were real hunting dogs, unlike Caesar, who was accidentally brought back to be raised as a poor wolf. Xiao Xian suppressed the shock in his heart and continued to look. The paintings on the left stone wall were obviously different from the ones on the right. In the middle, where the left and right were separated, Xiao Xian could not understand what the paintings were. They were too abstract and looked a little messy at first glance. Xiao Xian also could not make a guess based on the paintings before and after. However, it was obvious that after this painting, the style of the painting seemed to have suddenly fallen from the vigorous and confident state to a state of depression. Many of the paintings revealed a sense of bleakness and desolation. There were women kneeling and crying, children standing on the ground staring blankly at something, as if they were infinitely confused. The background of the paintings was not those big houses, but the cave where Xiao Xian was now. There were no more agricultural and livestock raising, no more women carrying baskets to gather food, no more riding and shooting, no more hunting dogs, no more pottery that was much more exquisite than stone tools. No matter if it was the left or the right stone wall, there was a symbol above the paintings: the tribe's totem. The Yanjiao tribe's totem looked like the horns of a double-horned rhinoceros, but the horns were longer and carried flames, just like the tribe's name. Then what was carved on the wall was the Yanjiao tribe. Xiao Xian recalled that archaeology classmate from his previous life had said that murals and rock paintings were usually used to depict the lives of the people of that era, or the things that people of that era imagined or hoped for. It was also a kind of spiritual sustenance for the people of that era. The paintings carved on the walls of this stone room were definitely not something that people imagined out of thin air. The emotions in the paintings were too strong. Only real experiences and things could arouse people's deeper, more intense, and more profound emotions. What did the tribe encounter? Natural disaster? Man-made disaster? Or was it a combination of both? At the end of the right stone wall, there were many palm-sized paintings. These paintings had different styles, such as the one at the top left, which looked like a spider resting on a web, and the one at the top right, which looked like a bamboo or some other plant. There was even one that looked like a mask, which looked very scary. There were plants, animals, and all kinds of things that Xiao Xian could not imagine. While Xiao Xian was studying the murals, someone called him from outside. "Xian, Uncle Gu is here. Xian, come here." The other kids in the orphan cave were not interested in the deeper parts of the cave. During the years they lived in the orphan cave, they only went to the designated places to pee and poop, and did not go deeper. They lost interest after seeing those places once. Therefore the kid who called Xiao Xian did not walk towards him, but shouted directly. Coming back to his senses, Xiao Xian realized that today was indeed the day when Gu would deliver food. This time, Gu also delivered 3 days' worth of food in one go. When Xiao Xian saw him, there was still a lot of snow on Ji's fur coat that had not melted, but Gu did not care at all. His eyes were fixed on the air vents filled with ice, and he was still fiddling with the stone plates in his hands. Obviously he did not expect that there would be such things in the orphan cave. Since he was responsible for delivering food, the orphan cave had always been dark in winter. He had heard that there were similar things in the orphan cave before, but he had never seen the kids use them. Plus, the orphan cave was in bad condition before, so he did not ask too much. He did not expect that he would be able to see them today. He asked the other kids in the orphan cave to help unload the food. Now that there was enough food, the kids in the orphan cave did not fight for it like before. After hearing Xiao Xian's words, they all went to help. Then Xiao Xian distributed the food according to groups. As for how to distribute the food, he did not need to worry about it. Today Xiao Xian did not let Gu leave immediately. Instead he asked Gu to tell the kids about the tribe. After all, Gu had nothing else to do after delivering the food. Xiao Xian just wanted to get more information from Gu, to see if he could connect it with the paintings on the stone wall. Unfortunately, what Gu said was similar to what Xiao Xian heard from the Lang Jie and the others. There was nothing he wanted to know. Gu drew a pattern on the ground with a charred twig. Xiao Xian knew that Gu glanced at him several times. Obviously, Gu had seen what he was drawing, but he did not show any abnormality. Apparently, Gu did not recognize this pattern. What Xiao Xian drew was one of the patterns with different styles on the right wall of the stone room. Gu could be considered as a senior warrior in the tribe, but he did not recognize this pattern. Xiao Xian sighed in his heart. It seemed that it would be difficult for him to know more about the paintings on the stone wall. Actually, at the end of the painting on the right side of the stone room, there was a sentence below the pictures of different styles. However, Xiao Xian didn't recognize some of the words and couldn't connect the rest of the sentence. Although Xiao Xian could speak the language here fluently, he was still unfamiliar with many words. Xiao Xian calculated the time when the old hunter would come again, so he learned the few words. He would ask when he had the chance. After another 10 days, the old hunter finally came down from the mountain and came to the cave again. He was surprised to see the changes in the cave. After checking, he found that the kids in the cave had indeed learned a lot. The old hunter was very happy. He took out another animal skin roll and taught them something new. During his free time, Xiao Xian asked him about some words. These words were not all from the stone wall, there were other words mixed in. Xiao Xian did this because he didn't want the old hunter to be suspicious. However, it turned out that Xiao Xian thought too much. The old hunter was very interested in teaching and did not think too much about other things. He only thought that Xiao Xian had seen these words from someone else, so he was very interested in teaching Xiao Xian how to recognize them one by one. After the lesson, the old hunter even praised Xiao Xian. These few words are well written, they're very impressive. You will definitely be a brave warrior in the future. Xiao Xian just smiled and did not say anything. The words that were praised were written by him imitating the words on the stone wall. He didn't copy them exactly, but because he copied them, it carried some of the charm and grandeur of the original. It seemed that the person who painted and wrote in the stone room was also a warrior, and probably very powerful. After the old hunter left, Xiao Xian wrote the words on the stone wall from the old hunter's new animal skin roll for the kids in the cave to study. Then he went back to the stone room. After recognizing the words, Xiao Xian finally knew what the words were. One day we will return to our homeland. The glory is still here and the fire of Yanjiao will never die. There was a word praise at the end of the sentence. It was probably the name of the owner of the stone room, the person who carved and wrote these words on the stone wall. The last sentence was carved very deeply, even deeper than the other paintings. The last few words were especially deep, which showed how strong the feelings of the person who wrote these words were. Although he didn't know why the murals were painted with stone powder, Xiao Xian was still very grateful to the person who painted and wrote these words. He admired them. From the words, he could tell that the person's situation or the whole tribe's situation was not good. It was even desperate, but the person did not give up. No matter how desperate the situation was, as long as they were alive, as long as the tribe was still there, it meant that there was still hope. Xiao Xian took the carbonized branch and drew a thumbs up behind the word praise. Here's another praise for you. Chapter 20. Xiao Xian stayed in the stone room every day, learning all the patterns on the right wall. He also studied the paintings on the wall, thinking that they might be helpful in the future. Anyway, he had nothing to do. Winter passed day by day and it was much calmer than he had imagined. In this winter, all the kids in the orphan cave stored fish, and with the food and firewood distributed by the tribe, as well as some common winter herbs prepared by Gu for Xiao Xian, nothing unexpected happened. 2 days ago, a younger kid caught a cold and had a fever. Xiao Xian boiled the herbs Gu gave him and fed him. His condition stabilized within 2 days. As long as the kid could survive this period of time, he would be fine. If his body was too weak, the herbs would be useless, and he would disappear from the world like the original body of Xiao Xian. Fortunately, before winter, the kids in the orphan cave often went out for activities, so they ate well and their bodies became stronger. The morbidity rate was not as high as in previous years. In the stone room, Xiao Xian put a fur mat on the ground. Sometimes when he studied the murals too late, he would directly sleep here. Drawing a pattern on the ground with his finger, Xiao Xian sighed after finishing one. 2/3 of the winter had passed, and there were still about 20 or 30 days left. If he could survive this, he would feel much better. Staying in the orphan cave every day made him feel like he was going to get moldy and rusty. He felt listless. While he was thinking, Caesar, who was lying next to him, moved his ears and looked outside the stone room. Then Xiao Xian heard Ji's voice. Today was not the day he had promised Gu to deliver food. Was it because he had been thinking too much in the stone room that he remembered wrongly? With doubts, Xiao Xian walked out of the stone room and went to have a look. Uncle Gu, what are you doing? Xiao Xian looked at the triangles he had drawn on the stone wall to keep track of time. Because Gu came every 3 days, Xiao Xian did not use the word zheng to keep track of time. Instead, he drew triangles. However, there was still 1 stroke left for the last triangle, which meant that Gu would come tomorrow. Gu stood next to the bonfire and shook off the snow on his clothes. He took out a roll of animal skin and said, "I'm looking for someone. Call all those who are over 11 years old here." Xiao Xian took the scroll and looked at it. There were 7 names written on it, including Stutterer and Butcher. The 2 seemed to have thought of something, and their eyes lit up as they looked over in anticipation. The names written on the animal skin roll were the same as what Xiao Xian knew. Xiao Xian called the people over and woke up the 2 who were still sleeping. The person who was forcibly woken up from his sleep and was still in a daze stopped rubbing his eyes when he saw Gu and the children standing beside him. Suddenly, he quickly packed up his things and ran to Gu with a grin on his face. Ji's sight paused on the fish-tooth necklaces hanging around the 7 children's necks. Then he glanced at the name tags they were wearing and checked them one by one. He was usually responsible for delivering food, so he had some impressions of the children in the orphanage. However, this time he could not be careless. He had to double-check. Yes, these are the 7. Gu put away the animal skin roll and threw a leather cloak to each of the 7 children. He said, "Put it on and follow me out later. Amoer, you come with us." Amoer was only 11 years old after the winter, so he was only 10 years old now. Hearing Ji's words, Amoer put on his clothes and carried his knife. Unlike the other children, who were either excited or envious, he calmly walked over as if he had expected this. "All right, Xian, you go back to sleep. I'll leave with the others first. I'll deliver the food on time tomorrow." Gu lifted the straw curtain and left with the children. Xiao Xian lifted the thick straw curtain a little. The cold wind blew in and made his eyes hurt. His vision was a little blurred, but he could still see the thick layer of snow outside the cave and the path made by Gu. The snow on both sides of the path was higher than the children walking on the path. The little figures were shivering because of the cold, but they still followed Gu closely. Their footsteps showed no sign of retreating, instead they were eager. Xiao Xian put down the straw curtain and went back into the cave. The rest of the children in the cave were no longer sleepy. They all stared at the fire in a daze. Xiao Xian knew why. After the winter there would be a snow festival and a sacrificial ceremony. The most important part of the ceremony was the annual totem awakening. Those who could awaken their totem power would become totem warriors. Those who failed to awaken their totem power would have to wait for another year. Normally, children around 10 years old in the tribe would be sent to the mountain for the pre-selection before the end of the winter. The shaman would keep the children who had a higher chance of awakening their totem power, and send the others back. However, compared to the other children in the tribe, the children in the cave were generally weaker, so the pre-selection was delayed by 1 year. In other places, children were sent to the mountain for the pre-selection when they were 10 years old, but in the cave, it was 11 years old. Mo was a special case. After all, Mo was not a pure child in the cave. Because of his frequent training, his body was much stronger than the other children. The children who followed Gu to the cave were definitely not calm now. They all hoped that the shaman would keep them this time, because as long as they were kept by the shaman, 90% of them would awaken their totem power this time. Even if the remaining 10% failed this time, they would succeed next year. Xiao Xian was only 9 years old now. After the winter he would be 10 years old. It was still early, so there was nothing for him to do now. After Gu left, he told the other children in the cave to look for him if they needed help. Then he went back to the stone room to continue studying the murals. 4 days later, when Gu came to deliver the food, he brought back 4 rather depressed children. Among them were Tu and Ba. The 2 oldest children, who were 13 years old, were not here. After the winter they would be 14 years old. It would be strange if they did not awaken their totem power. The former cave master, Ku, was also 13 years old. He knew some people who lived on the mountainside, so he must have been training this winter. Many warriors believed that the stronger the body before the totem power was awakened, the stronger the power would be after the totem power was awakened. Ku asked someone to take him in during the winter. He could eat better and he could also learn from the totem warriors. It was much better than staying in the cave. This was also the reason why Ku did not stay in the cave for the winter, but went up the mountain early this year. Don't be sad. It's just a matter of time. Maybe you can become totem warriors next year. Gu comforted the 4 depressed children, put down the food and left. I really envy them. They are kept by the shaman and they can learn from him. One of the children brought back by Gu said, "Hey, what did the shaman say to you?" The other children also gathered around and asked. The shaman. The 4 children who had lowered their heads, suddenly raised their heads 45 degrees. Their eyes were full of admiration and awe. Xiao Xian curled his lips. Teaching? Was it brainwashing? That old faker. Xiao Xian only cursed in his heart, but he would not say it out loud. Look at those 4 children. It had only been a few days, but they had been completely brainwashed by the old faker. After this episode, the cave became peaceful again. Although Tu and Ba were still depressed, they still had to live their lives as usual. One night, Xiao Xian was sleeping. He dreamed of 2 crescent moons, the melting of ice and snow and fire, until he heard some shouts. The shouts were getting louder and louder, and he was awakened from his dream. The shouts were not from the people in the cave but from somewhere outside. The older children listened carefully after waking up, and then their faces lit up. Winter must be over. Xiao Xian yawned and wrapped himself in the fur blanket. It was still dark, and the fire in the cave had already been extinguished. They could not see anything, and only the children's voices came from everywhere. Xiao Xian was led by Caesar to the entrance of the cave. Lifting the thick grass curtain, they could hear the shouts more clearly. They could hear the excitement and joy in those voices. Against the cold wind, Xiao Xian looked up at the night sky. The snow had stopped, and the 2 crescent moons that had disappeared for a long time appeared again. Although they were just vague shadows, they brought some vitality to the dark night sky. Winter was over, and the sacrificial activities of the snow festival were put on the agenda. How many people would become totem warriors this year? This was what many people in the tribe were thinking when they were shouting excitedly. Everywhere in the tribe, there were people standing outside their houses, looking at the night sky against the cold wind. When these people stopped shouting excitedly and discussed the upcoming snow festival, they suddenly heard a child's shouts from the other side of the cave. Chapter 21. That line of the lyrics came true. Xiao Xian wanted to slap himself. Why did he say that? When the sun came out and the ice and snow melted, Gu and his men blocked the group of kids who were holding their tools and planning to go fishing by the river. Seeing Ji's familiar smile and the men he brought, the kids remembered that every year at the end of winter before the ritual of the snow festival, they would be washed by the stream. They hated bathing the most. In a more elegant way, the ritual of the tribe required bathing. But in reality, the kids who didn't want to bathe would be forced to wash by the stream. Just look at the warriors Gu brought. They had to wash themselves even if they didn't want to. Fortunately, Xiaoxian was willing to wash himself. He didn't even wash his face for the whole winter. His hair was a sticky mess. If Gu didn't mention it, he wouldn't even think about how he looked like now. Xiaoxian walked to the stream and looked at it. Because of the waves, he couldn't see clearly, but he could roughly see how messy he was now. The strong warriors could jump directly into the stream, but the kids couldn't. Gu asked people to boil water in advance. Then he scooped half a ladle of hot water and added some water from the stream and poured it on the kids who were stripped naked and pressed on the stone slabs. He also brushed them with something unknown in his hands. Every time he brushed them, a large amount of black water flowed down. These kids were almost turned into clay figurines. Scoop after scoop of water, they were brushed clean. After brushing them, they were thrown on the haystack nearby. Someone would wrap them in clean animal skins and bring them back to the cave. The animal skins that the kids wore before were also taken away by the women in the tribe to be washed. They would only be brought back after they were washed and dried. Xiaoxian's eyelids twitched as he watched this scene. He felt like he had entered a meat processing factory. Seeing Gu looking at him, Xiaoxian immediately said, "I'll do it myself. Give me a ladle." Seeing that Xiaoxian was very cooperative, Gu threw him a ladle and then focused on the other kids. Anyway, none of the kids who survived the winter could escape. The children who were brought back to the cave after bathing were told that the snow festival ceremony would be held the day after tomorrow. This was the witch's decision. No one would argue or complain. It could be seen that the old faker's brainwashing was very successful. Even though he was tortured like this, he didn't complain at all. After 3 days of winter, the thick layer of snow at the entrance of the cave quickly melted. Naturally, the ice in the vent of the cave could no longer hold up. However, once the winter ended, the temperature rose quickly. After wrapping himself in the blanket, he didn't feel too cold. Everything seemed to have regained its vitality. What impressed Xiaoxian the most in the past 2 days was that many people who usually looked like beggars had tidied themselves up very well. Even if the animal skins they wore were not good and had holes in them, they were still clean and their hair was combed regardless of length. On the day of the snow festival, the kids in the orphan cave were still sleeping. The sacrificial ceremony would not be held until the evening. Since they were not allowed to go fishing by the river, they could only continue sleeping. When the time came, someone would come to wake them up. The straw curtain in the cave was lifted. Gu came in from the outside and said to the kids lying on the ground, "Well boys, get up. Pack up and get ready to go up the mountain." Xiaoxian almost didn't recognize Gu when he saw him. Gu was wearing horns of some unknown beast on his head, and there were several necklaces made of animal bones around his neck. The animal skins he was wearing were not the ones he usually wore. The patterns on the animal skins were very clear, and the hairs were like steel needles. They didn't look so soft. They must be from some kind of fierce beast. In addition to his clothes, Gu also drew patterns on his face with plant pigments. The patterns on his cheeks were very similar to the totem patterns of the tribe. His forehead, nose, and chin were all painted with the same pattern. Every time the hunting team went out, the warriors' faces would be painted with the same pattern. Although the totem patterns would also appear on their bodies when they were hunting, it seemed to be a tradition and a ritual to paint on their faces before the hunt. And now the sacrificial ceremony was the same. To be honest, it was the first time for Xiaoxian to participate in the sacrificial ceremony of the tribe. When he woke up in this place, the ceremony was already over, so he didn't have any memory of it. It was a very strange feeling. The children in the cave were very enthusiastic about the sacrificial ceremony, because it required the whole tribe to participate in it. No matter if they lived on the top of the mountain or near the foot of the mountain, no matter if they were strong warriors or crying babies, they would all go up the mountain. It was a symbol of the beginning of the year, and also the most festive event of the year. The sacrificial ceremony was held on the top of the mountain, very close to where the shaman lived. Leaving the Caesar in the cave, Xiaoxian followed the shaman out of the cave. It was getting dark and the night would come soon. The night swallow, which was active in the past winter, seemed to have realized something, so Xiaoxian didn't see any of them tonight. When they went up the mountain, Xiaoxian also saw other people going up the mountain in groups. They were all dressed up. On their heads there were antlers, ox horns, feathers, and some other head ornaments that Xiaoxian couldn't recognize. On their necks there were ferocious necklaces. Looking at the animal teeth necklaces on other people's necklaces, compared to the ones worn by the kids in the cave, they were nothing. The totem warriors also had the same painting on their faces as Gu. There were both men and women. Xiao Xian even saw a female warrior. She had colorful bird feathers on her head, several bone chains on her neck, and a belt that looked like some kind of snake skin around her waist. The pattern was very colorful, and her leather skirt was decorated with bone ornaments. When she walked, the bone ornaments made a ka-ka sound. Gu said that she was a very strong female warrior, and had some status in the tribe. When the other women saw the ornaments on the female warrior, they looked at her with admiration and admiration. In comparison, Xiao Xian and the others were like weak chicks walking in the middle of a group of strong human-faced warriors. Xiao Xian also saw other kids in the tribe. No matter if they lived near the foot of the mountain, on the mountainside, or on the top of the mountain, they all dressed up like adults. It was just that the visual impact on Xiao Xian was not as big as that of the adults. However, it was obvious that the higher up the mountain, the more advanced the ornaments worn by the kids living there. The kid walking in the front with the strong female warrior was as arrogant as a fart. "What are you wearing? A wild boar head?" Xiao Xian's eyes twitched. He looked away from the kid and found that the eyes of the kids in the cave were shining. They were enviously looking at the kids wearing advanced ornaments. Their bodies were cut and they were so tough. It was wild, mysterious, and filled with such strong barbaric colors. Xiao Xian's face was stiff all the time. This was the first time he clearly felt that he was living in a primitive tribe. Chapter 22. This was the first time that Xiao Xian went up the mountain. The higher the status of the people in the tribe, the higher the place they lived. As they got closer to the top of the mountain, Xiao Xian felt that the children beside him, as well as Gu and several other warriors, who were leading the way, were no longer as casual as they were at the foot of the mountain. They became much more cautious. When Xiao Xian and the others arrived, there were already many people gathered around the fire pit. People who lived at the foot of the mountain stood far away from the fire pit. According to the distribution of living places, the higher up the mountain, the closer they were to the fire pit. Fortunately, although they were far away, the terrain was high, so they could barely see the situation around the fire pit. How many people were there in the tribe? He didn't know before, but now Xiao Xian had a rough idea. Everyone in the tribe had to attend the ceremony today, no matter if you were sick in bed or had trouble walking. Xiao Xian roughly estimated that there were no less than 1,000 people, about 1,500. In Xiao Xian's opinion, 1,000 people were not many, but it was the first time that Xiao Xian saw so many people after coming to the tribe, so it was very lively. There was an open space at the top of the mountain with a circular depression in the center. And in the middle of the depression, there was a flame swaying in the wind. The fire pit. This was the first time that Xiao Xian saw the fire pit of the tribe. It was very different from what he had imagined. Xiao Xian had wondered why the fire pit was at the top of the mountain, because it was the coldest place in the whole mountain. Besides, the tribe already had relatively mature fire starters, so why did they still keep the fire pit? Everyone was full of awe when talking about the fire pit, and looked at the top of the mountain with unshakable piety. People in the tribe said that the fire pit was related to the rise and fall of the tribe. As for how it was related, Xiao Xian had never learned it from others. Now he could only find the answer with his own eyes. The top of the mountain was large enough for everyone in the tribe to stand. The depression in the middle had a radius of 4 to 5 meters, but the small flame burning in the center of the depression was like an ordinary candlelight. It was not bright and looked as if it would be extinguished by the wind. Moreover, Xiao Xian didn't see any firewood or other combustible materials in the fire pit, nor did he see any combustible materials under the flames. Over there was the fire seed that had existed in the fire pit for a long time. There was a circle of wooden stakes around the fire pit. The stakes were as tall as a person and very thick. There was a stone basin on top of each stake. Fresh meat, fruits, bird eggs and other things were piled up in the basins. They should be the sacrificial offerings. There were also people standing beside the stakes. Listening to the discussions around, Xiao Xian knew that those people were the strongest hunters in each hunting group. Some of them were young people and some were almost middle-aged. There were 50 people in total. Those people also had the same patterns on their faces as Gu and the others. The difference was that the patterns on their faces were not only black but also white and red. They were dressed more solemnly. One of them had a huge antler on his head, which was much bigger than the ones that Xiao Xian saw along the way. The antler almost covered the man's entire body. Except for the warrior with the huge antler, the others were not inferior to him. Xiao Xian thought that what he had seen on the way up the mountain was already exaggerated enough. He didn't expect that there would be even more exaggerated ones here. Suddenly the discussion around him became quiet. Xiaoxian looked over. It was the chief and the shaman. Wherever they passed, the crowd automatically made way for them. They were especially respectful. The chief also had a thick antler on his head, while the shaman was dressed lightly. He didn't wear anything too exaggerated. He only held a crutch, his back was a little hunched, and he was wearing a gray cloak made of animal skin. This was the second time that Xiaoxian saw the shaman. He didn't feel much different from when he raised Caesar last year. Following behind the chief and the shaman were the people that people cared about the most in this ceremony. There were nearly 80 children, ranging in age from 10 to 14. These children followed the chief and the shaman to stand by the fire pit one by one. Xiaoxian saw 4 people in the cave, including Moer. When he was in the cave, those children were so grumpy. But now they were as quiet as obedient babies. Their hair was combed and some bone ornaments were woven. Since Xiaoxian met them, he had never seen them so neat. There are so many children this year. Someone nearby whispered. Yes, there were only 30 or 40 last year. This year there are twice as many. This is a good sign. With so many new blood joining, our tribe will become stronger. The surrounding people were talking about it, and the group of children around Xiaoxian were also whispering. They were all envious, thinking about when they could also stand in the same place by the fire pit. After waiting for a while, the preparations for the ceremony were finished. The ceremony began. The chief was called Ao, a very strong man. It was said that his strength ranked in the top 3 in the tribe. Ao first spoke a few words about last year's harvest, and then looked forward to the future to boost the morale. In his previous life, Xiaoxian had heard similar words many times, so he didn't feel anything. However, some of the people around him were very excited. After the leader finished speaking, they raised their arms and roared twice. The group of little cubs also roared until their faces turned red. After the chief finished speaking, it was the shaman's turn. The shaman was the main part of the ceremony. Nearly 80 children stood around the fire pit. They were even closer to the fire pit than the warriors who stood beside the wooden stakes. The shaman held a cane, bent his back, and stood at the edge of the fire pit. He opened his arms and began to chant. The atmosphere suddenly turned tense. Everyone kept their mouths shut, and even their breathing was careful, afraid that it would affect the chanting. The Xiaoxian didn't understand what the shaman was singing. It didn't seem to be the tribe's usual language, and the tone was strange. However, the weirder thing was still to come. With the shaman's chanting, the flame in the middle of the fire pit jumped and rolled. Without any combustion-supporting materials, the flame grew bigger and bigger, spreading to the surroundings. The flame rose higher and higher until it reached the edge of the fire pit and covered the whole sunken fire pit. The flame also jumped to 3 meters high. At the same time, above the flame, a pattern formed by flames gradually appeared, becoming clearer and clearer. The flame formed a pair of horns that were connected at the bottom and curved in the same direction, one inside and one outside. The 2 horns were wrapped in flashing flames. That was the tribe's 2-horn totem. The first of the 3 flames of the fire pit, Soaring Flame. Soaring Flame, the totem appeared. Not only did the totem patterns appear around the fire pit, but the totem patterns on the bodies of all the warriors present also appeared. Everyone stared at the direction of the fire pit with pious eyes. The sky was completely dark, and 2 crescent moons appeared at the 2 ends of the night sky. But at the top of the mountain, because of the raging flames in the fire pit, the surroundings were brightly lit and covered with a layer of red. The shaman's chanting didn't stop, but became louder and louder. Then the sound of drums with a specific rhythm joined in. There were also the sounds of bones and stones hitting. Someone was beating the animal skin drum. The sound of the drum varied, but it was different from the sound of some drums that Xiaoxian had heard in his previous life. The sound of bones, stones, and drumming. The male and female warriors standing beside the wooden stakes also moved and joined in. They followed the shaman's chanting one after another with a certain distance between them. They formed a circle around the fire pit, waving their hands and feet and jumping. That was the ancient dance that had been passed down since the founding of the tribe. Xiaoxian remembered the words of his classmate who studied archaeology. Many tribes have their own ancient dances, and it is also a very important part of the sacrificial ceremony of each tribe. It carries the unique ritual of the sacrificial ceremony of the tribe in a specific era, and also conveys the worship of the tribe to their ancestors. Not everyone can learn and dance this kind of dance, and it has to be done according to the ancient teachings passed down in the tribe. But now, those who were jumping around the fire pit were all elites in the tribe, and were also recognized by the tribe to be qualified to dance the ancient dance in the sacrificial ceremony. Although those movements were funny in Xiao Xian's eyes, such an honor was indeed what everyone in the tribe wanted. When he was in the cave, Xiao Xian had heard a lot of kids fantasizing that one day they would become a member of the ancient dance in the sacrificial ceremony. The rhythm of the performance was indescribably strange. The individual notes were either ear-piercing or dull, but when these notes were combined together, they were extremely suitable for the current situation. It made people feel that this was how it should be. At this time, place, and occasion, this was how the rhythm of the music should be. However, compared to the ancient dance and the special rhythm, Xiao Xian cared more about those children standing by the fire pit. When those selected warriors were dancing the ancient dance around the fire pit, the flames in the fire pit rolled up higher and many flames flew out. Yes, they flew out. Sparks and flames flew out of the fire pit one after another and floated in the air. The second flame of the fire pit, flying flame. None of the children who were closest to the fire pit avoided it. They still stood there respectfully, letting the flames fly to their bodies. Xiao Xian stared at them with his eyes wide open. After the flames flew to the children, they didn't burn them. Even their clothes didn't burn. It was as if the flames directly merged into their bodies. As more and more flames merged into their bodies, the special patterns of totem warriors gradually appeared on some of the children's bodies. The more flames they touched, the clearer and more perfect the patterns became. The boiling flames didn't only touch the children who were selected by the shaman around the fire pit, but also spread to the edge of the gathering place. Many flames floated to the place where Xiao Xian was sitting. Looking at the flames getting closer and closer, Xiao Xian wanted to dodge out of reflex, but he forced himself to calm down. Since the others didn't move, it shouldn't be as harmful as he thought. Indeed, after touching the flames, Xiao Xian only felt a very comfortable warmth, but didn't feel burned. Now Xiao Xian was relieved. He continued to stare at the fire pit, ignoring more and more flames flying to him. Chapter 23. Xiao Xian's first reaction upon hearing Tu's words was disbelief. Even if he had been staring at the fire pit and did not notice the flames floating over, he was not so slow that he could not feel the burn. What did he mean by, "I'm burning"? How could he not feel anything if he was burning? To be on the safe side, Xiao Xian had stared at the flames on his body to make sure that there was no problem before he shifted his attention. The people around him were fine, even the dozens of children closest to the fire pit. Now you're telling me that I'm burning? However, even if Xiao Xian did not believe it, he could tell from the way the children around him were looking at him that things were getting serious. He looked at his hands. There was no problem. There were no sparks on his legs either. Xian. Head? Xiao Xian froze and raised his hand to touch his head. He touched it but did not feel anything unusual. He touched it again but still did not feel anything. His hair was not burnt and there was no smell of burning. However, when he glanced up, what the fuck? When Xiao Xian could finally see the fire above his head, it had already spread. Originally, it was only a small cluster of flames on his head, but now it looked like there was a bonfire on top of Xiao Xian's head. Moreover, as more and more flames floated over from the air, the flames gathered on top of Xiao Xian's head grew bigger and bigger, gradually spreading downward. Xiao Xian could feel the obvious flames on his head. He could see that the hair near his forehead was gradually wrapped in flames, but he did not feel any pain at all. He also did not feel anything unusual when he touched it with his hands. He took off his fur coat and patted it on his head twice, but it was useless. The flames still maintained their momentum of expansion. The flames flew over and sank into Xiao Xian's arms, legs and torso, but seemed to have transferred to his head. However, after the initial panic caused by the sudden change, Xiao Xian quickly calmed down. This was not the world he was familiar with, so he could not make inferences based on his original ideas. Since it was the fire from the fire pit and he didn't feel any burning pain, Xiao Xian didn't use his leather jacket to struggle against the fire. He stood there thinking about what to do next. The people in front of Xiao Xian didn't pay attention to them as they were all focused on the fire pit. However, the people standing behind Xiao Xian were different, especially some middle-aged and old people. They had attended the sacrificial ceremonies of the snow festival many times, but they had never seen someone like Xiao Xian. At the same time, the sorcerer singing beside the fire pit paused slightly and continued to host the ceremony. He could not leave now. He had to stay here. The ceremony of the fire pit was only 2/3 done. The remaining 1/3 was the most important part for him. Perhaps for the warriors in the tribe, The second flame was the most important and eye-catching one among the 3 flames of the fire pit. When the second flame appeared, a new batch of totem warriors would appear in the tribe. The hunting team, which had lost some warriors last year, was also keeping an eye on the second flame, waiting for those kids to become totem warriors and join their team. But for the shaman himself, the number of totem warriors was only a small factor. What he wanted to see was the situation of Yanzhan, the last flame. However, even if the shaman couldn't leave, he couldn't just ignore what was happening over there. So, while the shaman was still chanting, he gave Chief Ao a signal. Chief Ao, who was standing not far from the shaman, had already noticed the abnormality over at Xiao Xian's side. At first, he was hesitating whether to go over or not. After all, the shaman knew more about the sacrificial ceremony than he did. If he acted without the shaman's permission, it would bring unimaginable consequences to the ceremony. As the chief of the tribe, he had to consider the whole situation, not just a few people. After receiving the signal from the shaman, the chief signaled the others to continue. He then flashed towards the place where the abnormality was happening. Because the others were all staring at the fire pit, and the chief was moving too fast, not many people noticed it. Xiao Xian was thinking whether to let the fire get bigger and bigger, or to call for help. Without a doubt, Xiao Xian cherished his life. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't feel any real harm, he would have already called for help. But now the fire didn't burn him, and it was the most important occasion of the year in the tribe. Even the arrogant warriors in the tribe had now restrained themselves. If he shouted now and ruined the ceremony, what would he do if the whole tribe hated him? There was only one tribe in this area, and he was all alone now. He couldn't be abandoned. While he was thinking, he suddenly felt darkness in front of him. Xiao Xian raised his head and met the chief's confused eyes. There were so many people on the field, but Xiao Xian didn't hear the sound of people moving to make way. But now the chief appeared here quietly. He was just by the fire pit. The other children around were quite nervous, and their minds were no longer on the fire pit. Anyway, they had nothing to do with the awakening of totemic power this year. What was happening near Xiao Xian was more attractive to them. Even the chief came here. In their opinion, Xiao Xian must be in trouble. Chief Gu, who noticed this, was about to say something but was stopped by Ao, who signaled the others not to be distracted. The people around quickly calmed down and looked at the fire pit again. They prayed that they could hunt more prey in the new year, and that everything would go well. Of course, there were some who couldn't control their curiosity, and glanced at Xiao Xian from time to time. Ao looked at the child in front of him, and his heart was full of doubts. Was he going to awaken? This child was definitely not 11 years old, and he was much thinner than the children by the fire pit. He had seen all the children Gu brought up from the foot of the mountain during the pre-selection, but he had no impression of the one in front of him. Obviously, it was the first time for the chief to encounter such a situation. However, since the shaman had signaled him, he just needed to take him there. Don't be afraid, the flame of the fire seed won't hurt people. Ao comforted him in a low voice, and then grabbed Xiao Xian's animal skin coat and lifted him up. Xiao Xian lowered his head and pondered, so he didn't notice how the chief walked from the fire pit to the side of the field, but now he knew. Ao directly jumped up and stepped on the shoulders of the people present. He looked tall and strong, but his jump was very light. He carried a person as if he was weightless, and floated over the heads of the people in the tribe. Before Xiao Xian could catch his breath, he was already by the fire pit. Ao asked Xiao Xian to stand with the other children by the fire pit, and stepped back to where he stood before. Another child by the fire pit naturally attracted the attention of the people who had been staring at the fire pit. Some people wanted to whisper to the people next to them, but Ao glanced at them and they hurriedly stopped. A young warrior who was performing the ancient dance almost made a mistake because he was distracted. He hurriedly repented in his heart, calmed himself down and continued to dance seriously. However, more people couldn't help but feel confused. Was the child who had just been added also going to awaken his totemic power? But why wasn't he selected in the pre-selection? Was he too young? No one doubted the shaman's ability, so they only thought about his age. In addition to his age, it could be that the people at the foot of the mountain made a mistake. What on earth happened? Why was there a ball of fire on the child's head? When everyone was confused, Ao, who had returned to his original position, moved his eyes away from the fire pit, and looked down at the hand that had just held Xiao Xian. That vigorous hand that had hunted countless prey had already turned red from the heat. What did he just say to the child? The flame of the fire seed won't hurt people? Chapter 24. Because of the Xiao Xian's participation, The ceremony was different from the previous years. Even though the people in the tribe had their own thoughts, they were more concerned about the children who were awakening their power by the fire pit. Sai felt the obvious changes in his body and the totem patterns on his arms. He was overjoyed, but at this moment someone suddenly joined him, so he naturally noticed it. Sai turned his head and saw Xiao Xian shrouded in a ball of fire. The road of injustice is narrow. Wasn't this guy still young? After today's snow festival, he would only be 10 years old. Why was he here? Looking at the man who was 2 years younger than him, Sai was surprised and doubtful. Thinking of the time when he was beaten up by a group of people before the winter, Sai was full of anger. At first, he was very excited to be asked to stay by the shaman. He planned to follow the hunting team to hunt for a bigger beast after awakening his totem, and then walk around the cave for a few laps. But now, what happened? Since Xiao Xian was thrown into the room, he had noticed that Sai was standing next to him. However, he was not in the mood to argue with this kid. Before, Xiao Xian had been watching from afar, but now he could finally feel the tribe's fire pit at a close distance. He felt like he was in a sea of fire, but he did not feel burned. He only felt warm all over, and the coldness of the winter was gone. The totem patterns on the children by the fire pit were red, as if the flame had entered their bodies and awakened the power sleeping in their flesh and blood. They were more restrained. But Xiao Xian's totem pattern was much fiercer. The ball of fire that had gathered on top of his head had spread to the bottom of his body. Xiao Xian's eyes were filled with the color of fire. He did not know whether it was the fire from the fire pit or the fire from the top of his head. Xiao Xian felt a little pain in his head, and his body temperature was rising. The heat gathered in between his eyebrows and began to spread from there to his forehead, face, neck, torso, limbs. Without a mirror, Xiao Xian could not see the changes on his face. But since the totem patterns on the other children's faces were red, he should be the same. Xiao Xian felt the heat spreading from his shoulder to his arm. He looked at his arm. Previously, because there was a fire on his head, he took off his animal skin coat to extinguish the fire. After that, he didn't put it back on and left it there. Right now, Xiao Xian was only wearing a sleeveless animal skin robe. The fiery totemic patterns on his arms could be seen clearly as the heat spread through his body. The flames floating out of the fire pit were getting denser and denser, and the flames in the fire pit were also spreading outwards. The people in the tribe were busy praying at this time, so Xiao Xian was not so eye-catching as he was covered in flames. The rolling flames in the fire pit became more and more intense. Now the fire pit was no longer the small flame that Xiao Xian had seen at the beginning. Now the entire fire pit was like a volcano that was ready to erupt. However, it didn't give people a sense of fear. Instead, it gave people an impulse to worship it. The shaman's chanting had already reached the third stage. When the last note fell, the shaman raised his arms and swung them to the side. His grayish-white beast skin cloak was instantly engulfed in flames. The third flame of the fire pit, Yanzhan. The fire in the fire pit was no longer gentle like before. Instead, it was spreading out like lava. In the blink of an eye, the people on the top of the mountain who were attending the ceremony were drowned, and then it covered the bottom of the mountain. Near the foot of the mountain, Caesar, who was left in the cave, retreated to a corner. He stared at the entrance of the cave and growled in his throat. Outside the cave, there was already a sea of fire. The rapidly spreading flames covered the entire mountain, but it didn't burn any grass or trees here. It seemed harmless, but Caesar, who was hiding in the cave, was extremely afraid. If he could, he would dig a hole and hide in it right now. The night swallow, who had retreated to the edge of the residential area, saw the flames getting closer and closer. They reluctantly flew up again and quickly flapped their wings and flew away. The shaman, who had been standing by the fire pit with a serious expression, couldn't help but show a happy expression. He didn't need to look down the mountain, he could already feel the range of the flames. It was bigger than the range of the flames in the past few years. No, since he took over the position of shaman, he had never seen the third flame of the fire pit spread so far. Auspicious, auspicious, the shaman shouted. Auspicious. The people in the tribe raised their arms and cheered. The fire of Yanjiao will never die. Chief Ao also shouted happily. The fire of Yanjiao will never die. The people in the tribe shouted in agreement. They were all so excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Since the shaman said that the new year would be better, it must be. How could people not be excited and celebrate? The spreading flames lasted for about half an hour, and then gradually began to dissipate from the foot of the mountain to the top. At last, only the flames in the fire pit were still burning and surging. The totem above the flames was still there. After that, the scene was not so serious and became much more relaxed. The people in the tribe needed to vent their excitement, so they gathered together and walked down the mountain, chatting and laughing. When they went back, they found their close friends and relatives to roast some meat and drink some fruit wine. After eating and drinking, they had a good sleep to welcome the new year. Gu also took the children in the cave to walk down the mountain. They didn't need to worry about being attacked by the night swallow. Tonight, no birds or beasts would enter their residence. Of course, the Caesar was an exception. Unlike most of the people in the tribe, Xiao Xian and the other children who had awakened their totemic power had to stay on the mountain for a while. They needed to receive the shaman's second teaching. Of the nearly 80 children, except for 4, all awakened their totemic power successfully. The other 4 children left with disappointment, but when they thought that they would definitely awaken their totemic power next year, they were not so depressed. Xiao Xian and the others stayed by the fire pit. After the other people in the tribe left, they were led to a stone house by a few warriors. This stone house was much sturdier than the wooden houses Xiao Xian saw at the foot of the mountain. It was also much more spacious. 70 children didn't feel crowded inside. After awakening his totem power, it seemed that every breath he took had become much easier. Every muscle and every bone in his body seemed to have been reshaped and was filled with strength. Even if his entire person did not look much different from before, there had already been a qualitative change inside. However, Xiao Xian was still a little depressed. He looked at the other children, who were either talking about their awakening or gesturing with their hands and feet. If it weren't for the others watching, they would have competed with each other on the spot. After carefully looking at the people around, Xiao Xian took a few steps forward and poked the person who was bragging to others. "Hey, you there." "What?" Sai, who was interrupted, turned around and saw Xiao Xian. He didn't finish his sentence, so he took 2 steps back vigilantly. Perhaps he felt that it was too embarrassing to take 2 steps back, so he took another step forward. "What are you doing?" Sai asked, his eyes still full of vigilance. Before his awakening, he was taller and stronger than Xiao Xian, but he was still beaten down several times. After his awakening, he didn't dare to underestimate Xiao Xian anymore. "After your awakening, did your vision change?" "Vision, that is, what you see, compared to before your awakening, is there any change?" Xiao Xian asked. Hearing Xiao Xian's question, Sai raised his chin and said proudly, "Of course there is a change." The other children, who Xiao Xian didn't know, heard them talking about this topic, so they also joined in. They talked about how far they could see in the dim light. Compared to before their awakening, their hearing, smell and vision had improved greatly. Xiao Xian was the only one who kept silent. He couldn't help it. He couldn't tell others that the people around him were all skeletons. Chapter 25. Xiao Xian felt something was wrong when the ceremony ended. He had been staring at the fire in the fire pit when he realized that almost all the totems on his body had appeared. Since he knew that all the changes that happened to him were for the sake of awakening his totemic power, Xiao Xian was not worried anymore. However, when he stood beside the fire pit, Xiao Xian felt a sense of familiarity with the fire in the fire pit. He did not know if the other kids who had awakened their totemic power felt the same as him, so he could not ask anyone for details. So he just stared at the fire in the fire pit and studied it. When the shaman announced the end of the ceremony, Xiao Xian moved his attention away from the fire pit and was about to tease his old enemy Sai. However, when he turned his head, he saw a skeleton standing next to him. Xiao Xian was so scared that he almost kicked it. Looking around, the people walking in the tribe, the warriors who had finished their dance, and the kids who had just awakened their totemic power standing around the fire pit were all skeletons. Xiao Xian could not recognize them. The ones who were talking, walking, and moving their arms and legs were all skeletons. Xiao Xian was confused. He did not know whether it was his problem or all the awakened totemic warriors were the same. When he talked with Lang Jie and Mai, he only knew that the totemic warriors would grow faster after awakening, and their physical strength and reflexes would be greatly improved. However, he did not ask if he could see skeletons. Who would have thought of that? But now, Sai and the little warriors beside him did not mention anything about seeing skeletons. Just now, the two in front of him were talking about a piece of dried meat hanging outside the stone house, and did not mention bones at all. So, it seemed that he was the only exception. He was different from others when he awakened, and he was still different after awakening. What if he saw skeletons all the time? Would the people he dreamed of at night all be walking skeletons? Damn it. Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. Xiao Xian scratched his head. Now he could only see bones in his arms. He did not see any flesh at all. Motherfucker. As for how he recognized Sai earlier, it was because he had fought with Sai many times in the past. His first impression of him was that he was familiar with him. The second reason was his voice. When Sai bragged to others, he was not reserved at all. He was always in a state of excitement after his successful awakening. When he spoke, it was as if he was afraid that others would not be able to hear him. If it were not for these two reasons, Xiao Xian would not have recognized him so quickly. The warrior who led them here had left, and the shaman and the chief had not arrived yet. Now, there were only 75 children who had just awakened this year in the stone house. Since no one cared about them, these children had let go of their worries and gathered together to chat and laugh. In Xiao Xian's eyes, they were a bunch of skeletons whose jaws were opening and closing as they danced. Xiao Xian didn't go over. After knowing that something had happened on his side, he retreated to a corner to think. Xiao Xian had already taken off the name tag hanging around his neck. He remembered that the other children by the fire pit did not wear it. When he entered the house, he took it off and tied it around his wrist. His body did not feel any discomfort. The fire on his head did not hurt a single strand of his hair. Not only that, probably because of the awakening of his totemic power, Xiao Xian now felt refreshed and energetic. If it were not for the skeletons in his vision, he would be in a better mood. Unable to figure out the reason, Xiao Xian looked around. Other than the 70-odd skeletons, the stone house was mostly filled with stones. There were stone tables, stone stools, and stones of different sizes and shapes on the table. In fact, Xiao Xian's vision was not just a single color. On the contrary, in his vision there were white, gray, and black of different shades. For example, the children's skeletons were white, but the stones in the stone house varied from light gray to dark gray. Because of the shaman and the chief, these children did not touch the stones. However, they could still watch. Several children stood beside the long square stone table. They were discussing the quality of the stones. "This stone looks good. It must be good to make it into a stone knife." A child pointed to a stone on the stone table and said, "This one is okay. It should be close to the medium grade." Another child looked carefully and said, he did not care much about it. Medium grade stones were not rare for him. However, when he saw another stone on the stone table that was not conspicuous and not in a good shape, he was surprised. "This one is good. The quality is above medium. Unfortunately, the shape is not good. It can't be made into a stone knife. It can be made into a small spearhead." Xiao Xian looked over. The stone that was rated as medium grade by the children was gray in Xiao Xian's eyes. The stone that was above medium grade was close to dark gray. In order to prove whether his guess was correct, Xiao Xian stood aside and watched for a while. He listened to the children's evaluation of the stones on the stone table. In Xiao Xian's eyes, the stones that he didn't think highly of were the so-called low-grade stones. In Xiao Xian's eyes, the middle-grade stones were gray, and the better ones had a darker color. In other words, the better the quality of the stone, the darker the color in this special vision. Xiao Xian had an idea in his mind. While they were discussing, the curtain was lifted. The shaman came in with a walking stick, Chief Ao, and two warriors, one of whom was a woman. When the curtain was lifted, the stone house suddenly quieted down. The people who were showing off their knowledge immediately became obedient and respectfully saluted to the shaman. When he was near the mountain foot district, Xiao Xian rarely saw people salute. Usually, people in the tribe would only salute when they met someone with prestige. However, the people at the foot of the mountain were all at the bottom of the tribe, so it was rare for them to salute. However, Xiao Xian had learned this salute. The people in charge of teaching the children in the orphan cave not only taught them how to count and read, but also how to salute. The children in the orphan cave could not count or read, but they had to salute. If they did not salute when they met the shaman, they would be regarded as disrespectful by the people in the tribe. They would be disliked and ostracized. The shaman had been waiting by the fire pit. He didn't come until the fire in the pit had gradually shrunk and returned to the small flame like before. Probably because he had spent a lot of energy presiding over tonight's ceremony, the shaman was still supported by others when he came in. After finishing the ceremony at the fire pit, he drank some water and came here. He didn't know much about this group of newly awakened warriors, so he didn't have time to read the animal skin rolls. After he recovered, he came to the stone house. Ao Ta, the leader who came in with the shaman, glanced around the house and then fixed his eyes on Xiao Xian. The red burn on his hand hadn't disappeared yet, and he didn't have time to tell the shaman about this strange thing. A warrior put a stone bench in the middle of the stone house, and another female warrior helped the shaman sit down. The shaman took a deep breath and looked at the newly awakened warriors with a kind look. He was very pleased. Every year when he saw the newly awakened warriors, he always had an irrepressible pride. "Good, very good. You will all be the real brave warriors of our Yanjiao tribe. The shaman said slowly. Praised by the shaman, the children's faces turned red, and they couldn't wait to shout to vent their excitement. After looking around, the shaman asked, "Who is the last child to join us today? Stand over here and let me have a good look." The people in front of Xiao Xian stepped aside immediately. Except for Xiao Xian, the other children had stayed with the shaman for a while, so they had some impression of him. The only one they didn't know was Xiao Xian. "So it's you. Come closer and let me have a look." The shaman looked at Xiao Xian and said. Xiao Xian took a few steps forward and stood in front of the shaman. He wanted to see what the old shaman would say. Would he mention Caesar? Would he feel guilty for not asking about him for nearly a year? Didn't he know that it was hard to raise a wolf? Xiao Xian looked at the old skeleton sitting on the stone bench, and the shaman looked at Xiao Xian carefully. He still looked pleased and kind. "You, what's your name?" "Xiao Xian." Obviously, the old shaman didn't recognize him. Chapter 26. My name is Xian. Xiao Xian told the shaman his name in the tribe. Now he could only see the bones, but he could not see the shaman's facial expression. However, the shaman paused after hearing the name as if he was thinking about something. Xiao Xian knew that he probably did not remember it. After a while, the shaman said something, but he did not continue to ask about Xiao Xian. "Well, you can stand with your companions." Xiao Xian did not say much. He did not show any dissatisfaction on his face, but in his heart, he had already curled his lips. Did this old faker have a bad memory? Did he forget? Well, since you have awakened your totems and obtained the power brought by the awakening, then the first thing you need to know is how to use this power. The shaman explained slowly. This is the turning point of your life. From now on, you are a real totem warrior. However, this is also a new starting point. How far you can go in the future depends on you. Do not be careless. You can stay in the initial stage or continue to grow like those excellent warriors in the tribe. When the shaman said this, he especially looked at Chief Ao, indicating that this was a model for the young warriors. As the chief, Ao was naturally powerful, far more powerful than most of the warriors in the tribe. Because of the worship of power, many newly awakened warriors naturally idolized Ao, including this group of young warriors. As totem warriors, the first thing you need to know is how to find the source of power in your body. This was the main purpose of the shaman to let these young warriors stay tonight. The source of power exists in your bloodline. It is just that when you are young, it has always been asleep. One day, when the time is ripe, under the call of the flame seed, it will gradually begin to awaken. Close your eyes, throw away all distracting thoughts, follow the power in your body, and you will naturally see it. The stone house began to warm up. Everyone sat down and closed their eyes according to the shaman's instructions. Xiao Xian did the same. When his mind was empty, he found that a figure gradually appeared in his sea of consciousness. It was a pair of horns wrapped in flames, which was the totem of the tribe. In addition, there was an egg-shaped thing shining white light, which wrapped the totem inside. Egg-shaped, I see it. A child could not hold back his excitement and opened his eyes. It's a totem. Another child cried out. I saw it too. Me too. Everyone scrambled to say one after another, fearing that the shaman would misunderstand that they could not see the source of power, and that they would be regarded as stupid totem warriors with no growth potential. The shaman looked around and found that most of the children could find their source of power except for, Xian, have you found it? As soon as the shaman spoke, all the other children immediately looked over. When they were chatting with each other, Sai had told them that Xian came from a cave at the foot of the mountain. After the snow festival, he was only 10 years old. Generally speaking, only a few people in the tribe could awaken their power at this age, and most of them lived near the top of the mountain. They were the descendants of some powerful warriors in the tribe. There was also a saying in the tribe that the earlier one awakened, the more potential one had, and the higher the chance of becoming a powerful warrior like the chief. Before the end of winter, when they were chosen to stay by the shaman, the youngest one was Mao, the eldest grandson of the shaman. Chief Ao's usual hunting weapon was a spear. Countless prey had fallen under his spear, and this spear also represented Ao's countless glorious deeds. Many people in the tribe knew about it. According to the tribe's saying, the chief gave the name of his weapon to his first grandson, which meant a lot. Obviously, he had high hopes for this grandson. However, it was clear that in this sacrificial ceremony, the most outstanding one was not Mao, who was recognized as having the greatest potential, but Xiao Xian, who suddenly rose up and was only discovered in the middle of the ceremony. Mao's face was gloomy all the time, especially when he looked at Xiao Xian, with obvious provocation in his eyes, as if he could not wait to fight with him first. Unfortunately, Xiao Xian could only see the skeleton, and could not see the expression on Mao's face at all. As for the provocation in his eyes, it was completely wasted, as if he was throwing it to a blind man. Hearing the shaman's question, Mao also stared at Xiao Xian, expecting Xiao Xian to say no, so that Xiao Xian would definitely be laughed at by everyone. Unfortunately, Xiao Xian did not let them do as they wished. Hearing the shaman's words, Xiao Xian nodded. I also saw it. It's the same as the totem in the fire pit. Since everyone could see it, the shaman was relieved, and continued to spread the knowledge of the origin of the tinder to everyone. While Xiao Xian closed his eyes, and looked at the egg-shaped object in his mind other than the totem. Since no one else mentioned anything other than the totem, that was to say this white egg, was only seen by Xiao Xian himself. Based on this shape, Xiao Xian could not help but think of the strange stone he had held in his previous life, which could neither leave a mark nor be burned by fire. The more he looked at it, the more similar it seemed. If that was the case, then he had found the reason why he was different from the others when he awakened. Speaking of using the totem power, the shaman called Mao over to demonstrate. Give it a punch without using the totem power. Under the shaman's signal, a warrior next to him took out the stone slab he had prepared earlier. Mao walked out with his chest out. Seeing his grandfather, the chief of the tribe Ao, giving him an encouraging look, he took a deep breath, clenched his fist and got ready. He shouted loudly and at the same time punched the stone slab in front of him. Bang! A muffled sound. The stone slab only trembled a little. Mao frowned slightly and stood still, withdrawing his fist. Xiao Xian felt the pain for him. However, looking at Mao's fist, he found that Mao's finger bones were not injured, and there was no smell of blood. Perhaps even his skin was not broken. This was different from the strength of the body before the awakening. From the flesh to the bones, every inch of his body had been strengthened. Well, now use the totem power. Again. The shaman said. This time, Mao's frown loosened and he looked much more relaxed. The totem lines gradually appeared on Mao's face, and at the same time, Mao punched again. It was the same punching posture, and it seemed that he had used the same strength. There was nothing special about it, but it gave people a completely different feeling. Bang! The stone slab hit by Mao's fist broke into pieces. The little warriors were eager to try it themselves. However, the shaman did not take out more stone slabs, but let them practice here quietly to familiarize themselves with how to use the totem power. After the lesson, the shaman left with them. He had to take a rest now. Ao looked at the exhausted shaman, and then looked at his burning palm. He thought for a while and decided to come back tomorrow to talk to the shaman. The shaman, who was helped back to his stone house, lay down on the fur blanket. Under the light of the fire, he opened a roll of animal skin, which was recorded during the ceremony today. It contained the details of every child, including who started the awakening and who finished the awakening in the fire pit. It also recorded Xiao Xian's information, including Xiao Xian's birth and his current situation. When he saw that Xiao Xian also raised a wolf, the shaman tried hard to recall. That seemed to be the case. No wonder he felt familiar when he heard the name Xian. At that time, it was rare for him to go down the mountain to see how people were living at the foot of the mountain. He did not expect to hear someone talk about raising, so he left a mark to prevent people in the tribe from hurting the wolf. He wanted to ask for more food, but when he went up the mountain he was told that a kind of plant he had been looking for had been found. The hunting team brought back one. Since then he devoted all his attention to that plant, and studied the medicine for nearly a year. When he finally finished the research he did not even remember raising the wolf. He did not know how the wolf was doing now. At this time Caesar, who was finally remembered by the shaman, was squatting outside the cave miserably. Facing the cold night wind, he looked at the mountain and wished he could howl. Chapter 27. The next day, the little warriors who were immersed in practicing their totemic power woke up one by one. After a night of practice, everyone could basically use their totemic power skillfully. Xiao Xian also learned a lot this night. After getting familiar with how to use the totemic power, he tried to use the same method to deal with the egg that covered the totemic power. The results showed that it did work. When he used the totemic power, the light on the egg would dim a little, and when he used the power of the egg, the totemic power would be covered by the light of the egg. However, no matter which power he used, the totemic power would always be covered by the egg, which could not be changed. Although he could not switch between the two powers in the blink of an eye, At least he could use the two powers freely if he had enough time. He could use the totemic power and the power of the egg separately. And the result was that when Xiao Xian opened his eyes, he no longer saw skeletons. Seeing the familiar world again, Xiao Xian could not help but feel happy. It would be horrifying if he saw skeletons all the time. Fortunately, he could see such a colorful world full of vitality. After solving this big problem, Xiao Xian felt very relaxed. This time he saw many familiar faces, including those in the cave, Moer, Sai, and some kids he had met several times. It was better to look at their expressions. The vision full of skeletons was too dark and dull. This time Xiao Xian finally felt Mao's gaze. But even though he saw it, Xiao Xian just glanced at him and ignored him. Mao was also angry to be ignored by Xiao Xian. He wanted to communicate with Xiao Xian, but at this time the shaman came. Mao could only swallow his anger. He did not dare to be presumptuous in front of the shaman. The shaman asked about everyone's feelings. After confirming that there was no abnormality, he said that they could leave. As for other things, they could only adapt to it in the future during the hunting missions. As the saying goes, a teacher can show you the way, but it's up to you to practice. Even if the starting point is the same, no one can say for sure how much people who awaken in the same batch will grow in the future. Whether or not they can become an excellent totem warrior is not just a matter of words. Xiao Xian admired the old faker very much. Even though the children living in the orphan cave had experienced hunger and hardship for a long time, most of them were ferocious, but they never complained, nor were they twisted by darkness. When they were awakened, they would still be good warriors running toward the bright road. Most of this was due to the shaman. If the chief was in charge of the material life of the tribe, then the shaman was in charge of the spiritual life of the tribe. The responsibility of a shaman was heavy. Not far from the stone house there were some people waiting there. They were probably here to visit the child. Among them, Xiao Xian saw a familiar figure. It was hard not to see him. That big pig head was too conspicuous. Wasn't that the arrogant little kid with the exaggerated wild pig head he saw when he went up the mountain yesterday? Mao also saw him. The anger on his face suddenly disappeared, and he walked over with a complacent smile. "Brother, have you become a totem warrior?" The kid with the wild pig head asked. "Of course, who am I?" Mao looked even more complacent. So they were brothers? No wonder Xiao Xian felt that Mao looked familiar. The group of little warriors left one by one. Xiao Xian was about to leave too, but he was stopped by the shaman. "Xian, wait a minute." The shaman walked over and handed a pattern plate to Xiao Xian. "You have raised Caesar well. If you have any difficulties in the future, you can come to me." In the morning, the shaman had asked about Caesar's situation, and roughly knew what had happened to Xiao Xian in the past year. The fish incident did not attract much attention in the mountain, and the shaman had been busy developing herbs. Naturally, he paid little attention to it. He only knew about it this morning. However, the shaman was more interested in Caesar than the fish. He knew that he had neglected him. It was rare for this kid to raise a wolf, so he wanted to compensate him. The pattern plate given by the shaman last time was worn on Caesar's neck. This time he gave one to Xiao Xian. The shaman also promised to send some food to Xiao Xian after his house was built. Xiao Xian did not refuse. He thanked the shaman and left. After Xiao Xian left, Chief Ao came over, showed the shaman his burned hand, and told him what happened last night. The shaman pondered for a while and suddenly thought of something. He called Ao into the house. There was no third person beside them. "Now that you mention it, I remember. It is said that the original flame of the fire seed would indeed have such a situation." The shaman said slowly. "Do you mean?" Ao was shocked. As the leader, Ao naturally understood what the so-called original fire seed meant. Except for the first batch of people who settled here, only the chiefs and the shaman in the tribe knew that the flame of the tribe was incomplete. The so-called flame seed did not hurt others. After the floating flame seed fused into the body, it actually did not hurt the user. It was different for other people. After all, everyone had the same source of power in their body, but the power was more or less different. When it was awakened, it would naturally protect the user and repel the non-user. The flame of the fire seed did not hurt dead things, but it was different for living things. If people who did not belong to the tribe touched it, they would naturally be burned. Ao was a member of the tribe, so fundamentally speaking, the flame of the fire seed that awakened the source of power was the same. They were all from the tribe, so the repel was not serious. Ao's body was strong, so it was already good that he was not burned. As for the night swallow flying outside, they did not dare to enter the area where the tribe lived that night, because they would be burned or even burned to death if they touched the flame of the third flame. This was the main reason why Gu suggested Xiao Xian to leave Caesar in the cave instead of taking him up the mountain. However, this kind of self-protection was not so obvious after the flame of the fire seed was incomplete. Then, when the flame of the fire seed is complete, does it mean that the awakening is like Xian's? El was surprised. Very likely. Keep this a secret for now and don't let a third person know about it. We will discuss it after I read the animal skin scroll passed down. The shaman said seriously. Ao nodded. He also knew that it would take a long time to figure it out, but as long as he knew it was not a bad thing, it would be fine. As for other people in the tribe, if they asked, he would just say it was the reason for the awakening. Xiao Xian, who was walking down the mountain, did not know that his awakening was related to the flame of the fire seed. It was the way of awakening when the flame of the fire seed was complete. Since the chief and the shaman did not ask about the details of what happened last night, Xiao Xian would not tell them the secret. Instead, he continued to play the role of a child who had just awakened. Stretching his muscles and bones, he could hear the sound of bones cracking, but it was not the stiff feeling that came from sitting still for a long time. Instead, he felt that his whole body was full of energy. The depression that had been accumulating in his heart because he had inexplicably come to this strange world also dissipated a lot. When he walked, he felt that his whole body was much lighter. Standing on the mountain and looking into the distance, Xiao Xian could not help but feel a sense of heroism in his heart. Since he could not go back, he would live well here. He swung his arms and quickened his steps. With a light leap, he was already a few steps away. While running, he felt completely different from yesterday. It was said that after awakening, one could walk like a bird and be stronger than a beast. This was not just a boast. Even if Xiao Xian could not do it now, it was not impossible in the future. Chapter 28. Before Xiao Xian went down the mountain, people in the Mountain Foot district had been talking about Xiao Xian's awakening of totemic power. No one had expected that such a young and weak kid from the orphan cave could awaken his totemic power yesterday. Awakening at such a young age meant that he had great potential. Maybe he could become a powerful totemic warrior in the future. Some people tried to figure out why Xiao Xian awakened so early. Some said that it was because Xiao Xian went out to practice every morning just like the other kids in the mountain. That was why he could awaken so early. Some people also speculated that it was because of the fish. Such a thing had never happened in the Mountain Foot district before. How could Xiao Xian suddenly appear now? But this theory was refuted as soon as it came out. If it was because of the fish, then there were many kids who ate fish. Their own kids ate a lot of fish and they were 1 year older than Xiao Xian. But they still hadn't awakened their totemic power. So, in the end, people attributed the early awakening to Xiao Xian's practice every morning, and more people were convinced. So, when Xiao Xian went down the mountain, he found that many kids who used to sleep all day were taken out by adults to help carry stones or fish. Xiao Xian knew the reason after asking some people. Well, working was also a kind of exercise. Xiao Xian didn't refute what they said about waking up early to exercise. As for the real reason, Xiao Xian wouldn't tell them. The kids in the orphan cave didn't go out to fish today. Xiao Xian wasn't here, and Caesar didn't go out to dig for stone worms. Even if they had the tools, they couldn't get the bait, so they couldn't catch the fish. There were too many people in the gravel area, so the kids couldn't get any benefits from digging for stone worms. They were always pushed out. Caesar, on the other hand, didn't care what the other kids in the orphan cave said. Some people even gave him half a fish, but he just squatted at the entrance of the cave and didn't look at anyone. He just stared at the mountain. Seeing Xiao Xian return, Caesar immediately became spirited and rushed towards Xiao Xian. If he hadn't awakened his totem power and become much stronger, Xiao Xian might have been pushed down by her. All the kids in the orphan cave were looking at them eagerly. Xiao Xian took Caesar to the gravel field and dug up a lot of stone worms. After a winter of hibernation, the stone worms had also come out of the ground to move around. Today's harvest was quite good. Now that he had awakened his totem power, Xiao Xian would have to go hunting with him in the future, so he could no longer care about the things in the cave. After discussing with Gu, Xiao Xian assigned Tu and Stutterer to manage the team. Tu was good at counting and had a good memory. Now he was much bolder and could speak fluently. However, he looked too thin and weak. Stutterer, on the other hand, was not good at other things. His body size was obvious. If he was really fierce, the other kids in the orphanage could not do anything to him. The two of them should be a good team to manage the team. After solving the problem in the orphan cave, Xiao Xian saw Lang Jie coming to him with a bright smile. Good boy. Not bad. You awakened your totem power so early. I thought I would have to wait for another 2 years. Lang Jie was very happy. Xiao Xian had asked them if he could join their hunting team if he awakened his totem power. Mai did not refuse at that time. Later on he even helped Xiao Xian, which meant that Mai also thought highly of Xiao Xian. When they went to attend the ceremony yesterday, they felt it was a pity that Xiao Xian was not old enough this year. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xian gave them a big surprise last night. As a totem warrior he would be able to have his own room. And Lang Jie came here to help Xiao Xian. Lang Jie had a barbecue with some of his friends in the hunting team today, and they were talking about the first hunting trip of the year. When he heard that Xiao Xian and the others had already gone down the mountain, he came to find Xiao Xian and invited him to meet his future teammates. There were 6 people in Lang Ge's cabin. They were all very young. One of them had awakened his totem power last year, but he was already 13 years old when he awakened his totem power. After the awakening he grew much taller, so he looked much older than Xiao Xian. Knowing that these people would be his future teammates, Xiao Xian also greeted them warmly. "Don't worry about the house. We will cut some wood and build it for you tomorrow morning." The young man named Ong said to Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian used to think that he would have to wait for 2 or 3 years before he could have his own room. He didn't expect it to happen so soon. Generally speaking, people like Sai still lived with their own families. But for people like Xiao Xian who came from the orphan cave, they had to build their own houses. Basically, they had to find someone to help them build their own rooms. Since they were here, Lang Jie didn't let Xiao Xian leave right away. They stayed to eat the barbecue together. After a whole winter, the cured barbecue was not fresh anymore. Lang Jie and the others still preferred to eat fresh meat. Anyway, the first hunting trip of the year was coming soon. They brought some leftover cured meat with them and had a good meal. They wanted to get some fresh meat as soon as they finished eating. While they were eating and chatting, Ong suddenly mentioned a word that was widely spread in the tribe: the Feast of the Rich. It was a legend. It was said that someone in the tribe once held such a feast and invited some people in the tribe to attend. The people who held the feast would compete with each other to see who could provide the most food. The so-called more food meant that the guests would stagger and fall into the grass, or eat until they were full and vomited. Only then would the feast be considered a success. This kind of activity was called the Feast of the Rich. According to Lang Jie and the others, Xiao Xian knew that the Feast of the Rich was to give away or destroy more food and property than their competitors. Some of the more prestigious people would even destroy their own food, clothes, and other things in front of others. Sometimes they would even burn down their own houses in order to establish their prestige in the tribe, humiliate their opponents, and gain the long-term admiration of their followers. Those who could do this were all people who had a certain level of strength and status. They were ambitious people who fought for a higher prestige. They were arrogant, conceited, and stupid enough. When Lang Jie and the others talked about the Feast of the Rich, they didn't hide their admiration, as if they would kneel down immediately if they stood here. Seeing Xiao Xian's shocked expression, Lang Jie said with the attitude of an elder, "You still don't understand." Xiao Xian didn't understand. In his opinion, how stupid would they be to do such a thing? How could they be worshipped by Lang Jie and the other warriors? No, it should be said that the people in the tribe worshipped this very much. Thinking back to his previous life, Xiao Xian had to have leftovers to give face when treating people to a meal. Xiao Xian suddenly understood. It turned out that this custom was passed down from a long time ago. But even if it was wasteful, it shouldn't be to this extent. He still underestimated the people's obsession with food and their pursuit of this alternative view of food. In the past, he always heard the children in the tribe talk about which warrior had defeated which huge and ferocious beast. Those heroes of the past were worshipped, and these glorious deeds were remembered and passed down from generation to generation for the children to hear. But now Xiao Xian was told that there was another kind of glorious deed that was even more glorious. It turned out that in order to make people follow you willingly, you didn't need to use force to beat them down again and again. You didn't need to persuade them, give them benefits, or make a lot of psychological schemes. All you needed to do was hold a feast of the rich, and there would naturally be countless willing followers. Xiao Xian felt that his values and outlook on life had been distorted again. Looking up at the 2 crescent moons in the night sky, Xiao Xian sighed, "One day, I'll definitely be stupid." "What did you just say?" Lang Jie didn't quite understand the second half of Xiao Xian's sentence. "Nothing. I mean, if possible, let's hold one too," Xiao Xian said. Lang Jie and the others laughed when they heard this. Lang Jie patted Xiao Xian's shoulder and laughed non-stop. After laughing, he praised Xiao Xian, "You're ambitious." In the eyes of Lang Jie and the others, Xiao Xian's words were just childish words that came out of his mouth after hearing about the legends. They didn't take it to heart. After all, they had never seen anyone hold a feast of the rich, not even their parents or ancestors. Were the legends true? Even the shaman and chief hadn't seen one. Probably because he felt that it wasn't good to continue this topic, Lang Jie changed the topic. He wanted to show off more to Xiao Xian. Do you know what our closest companions are since we were born? Lang Jie asked. Xiao Xian sat up straight and lowered his head to think for a moment. He looked meaningfully at Lang Jie and asked tentatively, left hand? Lang Jie, next week's ranking, please support me with your recommendation votes. Chapter 29. Lang Jie choked. Originally, Lang Jie had thought of several possible answers that Xiao Xian might give. Then, as an elder and an experienced person, he would answer and teach him one by one, just like when new members joined. However, Lang Jie did not expect that Xiao Xian would not follow the rules at all. He really did not understand why Xiao Xian would give such an answer. What did it matter? However, Lang Jie did not think too much about it. With a stern face he corrected, it's the stone. You should also know that a long time ago when our tribe first settled here, we lived in the stone cave. Every day we would see and touch stones. They could shelter us from the wind and rain, cut wood and chop firewood for us. As he spoke, Langa's stern face became lighter. His emotions were slightly excited. He clenched his fist and said, at the same time we also use stones. With them we can pierce through the thick skin of fierce beasts. We use stones to smash the heads of those prey. Even if we are in danger, the stones will still be with us until the last moment. They could provide protection, accompany, and never betray or abandon. People in the tribe began to touch stones from the moment they were born. They played with stones, used stones daily, and used stones as tools. For warriors who often went out to hunt, stones were more than familiar. They could not live without stones. No wonder Lang Jie said so. Of course, Xiao Xian preferred to call stones tools. After all, stones had no life. Now, do you know who our closest partner is? Lang Jie looked at Xiao Xian. His eyes seemed to say, little guy, try saying something wrong again. Xiao Xian nodded seriously. Stone. Ha, that's right. Lang Jie suddenly showed a satisfied smile and continued to talk about hunting. By the way, Xian, you have just awakened. You can't participate in the first hunt this year. Maybe you can't participate in the second one either. As for the third one, it depends on your ability. Lang Jie said. There was such a saying? Xiao Xian really didn't understand. Seeing Xiao Xian's confusion, Lang Jie explained, you've just awakened, so you're not familiar with using your abilities yet. You'll have to go through a period of training. Lang Jie was tactful, but Xiao Xian could guess the reason from these words. The reason why the newly awakened children were not allowed to participate was to protect them. After the end of winter, when the flowers bloomed in the warm spring, many wild beasts that had been hungry for the whole winter would become active again in the forest. The poisonous snakes were also more venomous. The forest was full of all kinds of dangers. If no one followed and protected them at all times, it was very easy to die in the forest. The tribesmen didn't want to see such a thing happen. The second reason was that Xiao Xian's group was not up to standard yet. In a hunting team that valued teamwork, they would only be a burden. Not only would they not be able to help, but they would also drag the team down. Understood. Xiao Xian was not disappointed after he thought it through. Besides, he also felt that they should build a good foundation first. More practice was not a bad thing. He thought that Xiao Xian would be disappointed or unwilling like the other children, but he didn't expect that Xiao Xian would be able to think it through. Lang Jie was relieved. He pulled Xiao Xian over so that Xiao Xian could get to know a few people in the hunting team, and also to talk to Xiao Xian about this. In the past, many children sharpened their knives and wanted to go hunting with them, but they were told that they couldn't go the first 2 times. Many of them made a lot of noise. Usually, in that kind of situation, the children would be disciplined by their elders. After a few punches and slaps, they would become much more obedient. But Xiao Xian came from the orphan cave and had no parents now. He was still young and looked thinner than other children. Lang Jie was really afraid that he would be hurt. Okay, I'm relieved that you can think it through. Alright, I have a few good stone cores here. You can see if you can use them. You can polish them yourself or go find a stonemason. Lang Jie took out several stones of different sizes from a big animal skin bag, which were the stone cores that Lang Jie mentioned. Stone cores were the raw materials for making stone tools. After giving the stone cores to Xiao Xian, Lang Jie also told Xiao Xian some of his training experiences. The others didn't hide anything from him because they didn't have such an awareness. Xiao Xian kept their suggestions in mind and sincerely thanked them. Your father helped me when he was alive, Lang Jie said. People in the hunting group were all like that. They would help each other whenever they could. Although they couldn't help much, at least they could make Xiao Xian's life easier. After eating the barbecue, Xiao Xian left. He still had things to do, and Lang Jie and the others would continue to discuss the upcoming hunting in 5 days. Xiao Xian came out of Lang Ga's room. He didn't walk far before he was stopped by someone. Are you Xian? Xiao Xian looked towards the direction of the voice. It was a kid who was a little older than Xiao Xian. He looked about the same age as Sai, but he was a little stronger. The animal skin he was wearing was of good quality. He didn't look like he lived in the Mountain Foot district. He should live on the mountainside or even higher. Xiao Xian had some impression of him. He awakened in the same batch, but Xiao Xian didn't know his name. At this moment, the kid lifted his chin slightly, looking arrogant. He was sizing up Xiao Xian. Didn't his eyes get tired of lifting his chin while standing at a high place? Xiao Xian looked at him and asked, "Who are you?" At first, Xiao Xian thought that Fei would put on airs and say something like, "It doesn't matter who I am," but Xiao Xian heard him say directly, "My name is Fei. 5 days later, I will go out with the hunting team to participate in the first hunt of the year. You have to wait for a long time, don't you?" After saying that, he proudly laughed at Xiao Xian, and then jumped over Xiao Xian's head. When he landed on the ground, he jumped again. After a few leaps, he was standing in front of Lang Ga's door. Obviously he wanted to talk to Lang Ga. Before entering the house, the kid turned around and snorted at Xiao Xian, showing off and complacent. That move just now was not bad among his peers. His father often praised him for running faster, jumping higher, and jumping further than others. Xiao Xian scratched his chin. That kid made such a big noise when he landed. Was it really okay for him to go hunting with them? However, for a kid like Fei who had just awakened, to be able to go hunting with the hunting group for the first time, it was obvious that someone in the group was protecting him, and that person must have a high position in the group. Otherwise, people like Lang Jie and the others would have no right to speak. Being protected by someone was indeed willful. However, Xiao Xian was not discouraged. He was not depressed because of what happened just now. He was not a real kid and he knew how to make progress step by step. He was not so eager for quick success. This kind of thing might affect other kids, but he didn't care at all. Xiao Xian took Caesar to catch some fish. After a whole winter, the fish in the river were still so stupid, biting the bait and not letting go. They looked fierce, but unfortunately they did not have much intelligence. When he was at Lang Ga's place, he heard them talking about hunting. Xiao Xian knew that many prey in the forest were like piranhas in the river. They looked fierce and had long teeth all day long, but as long as you knew the trick, it was easy to catch them. Some prey looked docile, had no fangs and were vegetarian, but if you were not careful, you would be sent to heaven. Their aggressiveness was not inferior to many carnivorous species. After all, this was an unfamiliar world, so it was better to be prepared. Xiao Xian thought. Carrying the fish and a few pieces of old animal skin, Xiao Xian asked someone to help sew the animal skin bag and paid the crafting fee for 1 fish. Then he took the remaining 3 fish to the stoneware maker Ku. Now that he was strong, he did not need Caesar's help. Xiao Xian was not tired carrying 4 big fish by himself. When Xiao Xian arrived, a few people came out of Ku's house, holding various finished stoneware in their hands such as stone knives, spearheads, adzes and so on. These people were all here to exchange for stoneware. After all, the hunting was about to begin, so they also needed to prepare more tools. Ku was a famous stoneware maker in the Mountain Foot area, so naturally there were many people here. However, if it were not for Ku's bad temper, there would be more people coming to exchange for stoneware. Every year, Ku would drive away some people who came to exchange for stoneware. Some people said that Ku was just too direct. When he spoke, he was merciless and did not know how to beat around the bush. However, Xiao Xian did not think so. Did Ku really not know many things? Was he really that straightforward? Not necessarily. After getting permission, Xiao Xian lifted the curtain and walked in. Ku was making stoneware. During the winter he made some stoneware, but these 2 days he exchanged most of them. There were still some stone cores and food piled up in the house. These were the processing fee that he had not collected yet. Putting the fish on the side of the pile of food, Xiao Xian came to Ku. "Uncle Ku, I want to learn how to make stoneware." Last time when Xiao Xian came to learn, Ku said that it was not the right time yet, and that he should wait until he awakened his totem power. Now Xiao Xian had awakened his totem power, and according to Lang Ga's training method, he needed a lot of stoneware tools. Xiao Xian did not have enough food to exchange for training stoneware, so he wanted to make stoneware himself. Ku stopped what he was doing and looked at Xiao Xian carefully from head to toe, and then looked directly into Xiao Xian's eyes. Xiao Xian did not avoid it. A few seconds later, Ku handed Xiao Xian a stone hammer, and pointed at a stone core not far away. There were a few lines drawn on the stone core, but they were all curved instead of straight lines. Follow the lines and hit, Ku said. As a newcomer, Xiao Xian took the stone hammer, looked at Ku, and then looked at the stone core. He lifted the hammer and hit it. The first hit was too cautious. He hit the line but only made a small dent on the stone core. He did not use enough strength. Again. The second hit was too forceful. What he hit was not a stone chip, but a stone, and it went beyond the line. Xiao Xian caught a glimpse of Ku's forehead, and knew that Ku was very dissatisfied with his 2 hits. But since Ku did not say anything, Xiao Xian continued to hit the stone along the line, and he did it boldly. He was not afraid of the first 2 hits. Peeling a stone chip of a predetermined size from the stone core was not as simple as it seemed. The stoneware maker had to estimate the length of contact between the hammer and the stone core, the angle of impact, the speed, and so on according to different stone materials. Was it a straight hit? Or a curved hit? What was the material of the stone hammer and stone core? How much strength should be used, and so on and so on? Ku had told Xiao Xian all these, and Xiao Xian had seen Ku peel the stone chips from the stone core every time he came here. But when he really started to do it, he knew that it was very difficult. A small difference could lead to a huge difference. Again. Xiao Xian hammered again and again, while Ku sat beside and watched silently. Caesar, who was squatting beside, looked at Xiao Xian, and then looked at Ku, who was silent but had a strange look on his face. He moved his legs, moved back and moved again, and directly retreated to the corner to lie down with the fish. Sorry, that's it. Chapter 30. At first, Xiao Xian would look at Ku's reaction every time he hammered. But after a while he stopped paying attention to Ku and immersed himself in hammering. The process of hammering required a lot of mental and physical effort. It was not as simple as waving one's arms. Every hammering required a lot of consideration such as the angle, strength, how to swing the hammer, where to hit, and so on. All of these had to be decided in a short moment. For many people in the tribe, after hammering for a long time and gaining experience, they could achieve the best hammering effect based solely on their intuition. However, Xiao Xian was just a beginner. It was impossible for him to have the experience of a stoneware master who had been hammering for decades. He could only rely on calculation and rough estimation, and then try again and again to improve. Even though his body was much stronger now and his strength had increased, it was not infinite. When he first held the stone hammer, it did not feel heavy. But after hammering for a long time, as the strength in his body drained away, he felt that the stone hammer in his hand was getting heavier and heavier. However, he could not make any mistakes at this time. If he changed the strength of his hammering, the leaf-shaped stone pieces that were hammered down would completely exceed his expectations, and there would be a lot of waste materials. Because of this, Xiao Xian did not have the energy to pay attention to Ku's reaction. At first, the time between hammering was slightly longer, because Xiao Xian had to think about the shortcomings of the previous hammering so that he could improve on the next hammering. However, as he hammered again and again, Xiao Xian gradually got the hang of it. He became more proficient, and the time between hammering became shorter and shorter. After countless hammering, Xiao Xian felt that he was about to collapse. However, Ku did not ask him to stop. Instead, he would point out his mistakes from time to time. It was like running a marathon. As he ran, he felt that he was about to reach his limit. He wanted to stop and rest, but every time he stopped, someone would urge him from behind. Go on. Go on. Knowing Ku's temper, Xiao Xian knew that if he stopped now, he would not be able to learn stoneware from Ku in the future. Even if he was tired, he could only grit his teeth and continue hammering. When the last bit of strength in his body seemed to have been drained, Xiao Xian gradually felt relaxed as he hammered. For a moment he even wondered if this was the feeling of breaking through one's limit. What Xiao Xian did not know was that when he felt relaxed and much of his strength recovered, totem patterns had already appeared on his face. Unknowingly, he had already activated his totemic power. However, he was too focused on hammering and did not pay attention to the totem that lit up in his mind. Ku's attention to attention, he was a lot of people's attention to stone crafting skills, but very few people would use their totem to use their totem power in the process. Some people thought that totemic power was sacred and could only be used for hunting and defending the tribe. Although some people didn't think so, it wasn't easy to control totemic power precisely. Only experienced old warriors could do that. However, people at Xiao Xian's age or some young warriors like Lang Jie could not control it well. Once they used their totem power, it was easy to break the stone core into pieces. That was not processing but destruction. Those who were impatient or irritable would just quit. It was too fucking tiring. If they had the time, they might as well practice their hunting skills. Because of this, Ku was very surprised. Not only did Xiao Xian use his totem power, but he also did not directly break the stone core. Instead, the leaf-like stone pieces were even more perfect. Almost every piece of stone could be further processed and would not become waste. How rare. However, Xiao Xian did not notice it at all. He was immersed in hammering, and his mind was filled with the experience of each hammering. Then he would proceed to the next hammering. Therefore, he missed the surprised expression on Ku's face for a few minutes. It was not easy to make Ku, who usually kept a straight face and rarely showed any other expressions, show such a surprised expression even when talking to familiar people. Xiao Xian didn't stop until he finished hammering out the lines. He looked at the ground next to the stone core. Some of the small pieces of stone pieces were gathered into a small pile, and some were scattered on the ground. He looked at Ku, who was still expressionless. Xiao Xian put down the stone hammer, and breathed heavily, waiting for Ku's evaluation. At the same time, he sighed in his heart. It was not easy to be a stoneware craftsman. No wonder there were so many injured warriors in the tribe who could no longer participate in hunting, but only a small part of them became stoneware craftsmen. The rest of the stoneware craftsmen only did it for their own daily life, and to provide stoneware tools for the younger generation. Apart from that, they also had other things to do. For example, Gu was responsible for the logistics of transportation, instead of stoneware craftsmen. Naturally, their skills in stoneware crafting were not as good as professional stoneware craftsmen like Ku. The surprised expression on Ku's face had already calmed down, and he returned to his usual expressionless face. He was still sitting in the same place. He raised his hand and took a slender wooden stick from the side, and pushed aside the stone pieces that were piled up together. Then, with a slight shake of his hand, the slender wooden stick picked up a small piece of stone with a sharp tip. The small piece of stone that was picked up drew a parabola in the air, and fell into a wooden box full of stone pieces to be processed. The stone pieces that were peeled off could be made into scrapers, sharp tools, stone awls, stone arrowheads, and so on. Although there seemed to be a lot of stone pieces knocked off, Ku's picking speed was also very fast. Xiao Xian saw the stone pieces flying from the ground into the stone plate like a string of beads, and was overwhelmed. Before Xiao Xian could take a few breaths, Ku had finished picking. Putting down the wooden stick, Ku said expressionlessly, "Trash." Xiao Xian's eyelids twitched, but he soon realized that the trash was not talking about him, but the stone pieces that were knocked off from the ground and could not be processed further. These were considered as trash. Obviously, Ku was not satisfied with the amount of stone pieces that were knocked off. "I originally planned to make a stone ball, but now it seems that I can barely make an adze." Ku looked at the stone core that had been peeled off with disdain, and said a long sentence which was rare for him. Xiao Xian suddenly felt relieved. He was worried that Ku would directly ask him to leave, but since Ku said so, it meant that he did not object to teaching him. "Give it to me." Ku pointed at the stone core that Xiao Xian had knocked off. Xiao Xian quickly put down the stone hammer, took the stone core that was in a terrible state, and put it on the stone anvil in front of Ku. "Look carefully." Ku picked up the stone hammer that Xiao Xian had just used, and with the other hand he picked up the stone core that was twice as wide as his palm. He held it firmly and looked at the stone core. Xiao Xian only heard a whoosh sound of wind, and the hammer flashed by. Ding! The stone hammer hit the stone core, making a crisp sound. At the same time, a stone piece was knocked off from the stone core and peeled off. The stone piece that was knocked off did not directly fall to the ground, but fell into a wooden box hanging on the wall. From swinging the hammer to knocking, Ku was very neat, as if he had already determined which piece of the stone core would be knocked off before he swung the hammer. He was not like Xiao Xian when he was knocking just now as if he was on a battlefield, but when he swung the hammer, there was a kind of casualness. This was the real peeling stone, unlike Xiao Xian who was just knocking off the stone, and what he knocked off was mostly waste. After the first strike, Ku did not give Xiao Xian too much time to think, and then the second strike, the third strike, and the fourth strike. The hammer flashed continuously, and the sound of ding ding was incessant. As the hammer moved faster and faster, Xiao Xian even felt that the sound had become one, and he almost could not hear the interval between the hammer strikes. The stone pieces that were peeled off from the stone core fell into the wooden box one by one, and at first glance, It looked like a rainbow bridge connecting the stone core and the wooden box. Xiao Xian's eyes were straight. He knew that Ku's ability to restrain stoneware was very strong, but he still did not expect that he had underestimated this old stoneware craftsman. He actually had such uncanny workmanship. This was not peeling stone, this was simply cutting noodles with a knife. Obviously, when Xiao Xian came to observe in the past, he did not see Ku's real ability. What he saw in the past was just the tip of the iceberg, and it was far from being enough to describe Ku's stoneware skills. So exquisite, so precise. When Xiao Xian came back to his senses, Ku had already finished peeling the stone pieces, and the stone core in his hand was already in the shape of an adze. After that, he drilled and polished, installed the wooden handle and shaped the tool. Perfect. Take it. Ku handed the completed adze to Xiao Xian. For me. Xiao Xian took the adze and looked at Ku. Ku had already turned around to do other things, so he took the adze and waved it twice. He had participated in the processing of this adze. Although his skills were rough and unsightly, and he had almost destroyed the stone core, it was still his first time seriously participating in the process. It was also rare for him to seek his ultimate skills. For Xiao Xian it naturally meant a lot. The stone core used to make this adze was fine, compact, and hard. It did not look obvious, but when he held it in his hand he could clearly feel its weight. It was of a medium quality. He did not expect Ku to give it to him just like that. Peeling stone pieces, even if it's the simplest way, takes a lot of time to achieve the most satisfactory result, and there is no shortcut. You have to anticipate the peeling of each piece of stone, and then think about the speed, weight, strength, consequences, and so on, and relate them to the stone core. The amount of strength, the best angle, and the thousands of changes in the process from raw material to finished product are all things that cannot be described in words. How to use strength, what angle, how to hit. You can only understand these through repeated practice. Ku turned his back to Xiao Xian and said, "Yes, stone tools were different from iron tools. One wrong step could not be repaired, and there was no way to reverse it. Once the hammer hit, it was either a success or a failure. The hammer was the final word." Xiao Xian held the adze and bowed respectfully to Ku. "Yes, I understand." But, Ku changed the topic and pointed at the dead fish in the corner who were staring at Caesar. "You have to know how to summarize when you practice. If you fail, you can, but you have to learn from your mistakes. You can't be like these fish." Understood. Xiao Xian could understand what Ku meant. Ku meant that Xiao Xian should not be like these piranhas, who were stubborn and did not learn from their mistakes. They would not turn back even if they were killed. "Take one of them away," Ku said. He was driving him away. Oh. Since Ku asked Xiao Xian to take a fish back, it was useless for Xiao Xian to refuse. Without saying anything more, he took a fish, the adze, and called Caesar to leave. Carrying the fish out of the door, Xiao Xian looked at the fish in his hand and thought of Ku's words. He could not help but laugh and poke the fish's head with the adze. "Stupid. Fish, are you blaming me? There was one more thing tonight." Chapter 31. Early the next morning, Lang Jie and the others came to the cave to look for Xiao Xian. The wood was ready and they were just waiting for Xiao Xian to name the place. They would start building the house on whichever piece of land he liked. Xiao Xian was familiar with the mountain foot district. With his current condition, it was impossible for him to build a house on the mountainside. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? As for the place to build the house, Xiao Xian already had his eyes on it. Although it was a little out of the way, he could see the situation on the mountain, the foot of the mountain, and the cave from there. Lang Jie and the others were very familiar with building a wooden house, and with their great strength, it took them only half a day to build the wooden house. They just needed to fix some small details, and the wooden house could be lived in directly. This was the first time they built a house, and the area of the wooden house was only about 40 square meters. It looked okay and they could expand it by themselves in the future. At least they would have their own place in the future. Overall, Xiao Xian was very satisfied. Lang Jie and the others wanted to chop the extra wood for firewood, but Xiao Xian stopped them. He asked Lang Jie to help him build a simple wooden bed. Some people in the tribe liked to sleep on stone beds, some liked to sleep on haystacks, and some people built their beds with wood. Xiao Xian naturally preferred the latter. It looked much more comfortable than sleeping in the cave. "Xian." Xiao Xian heard the voice and looked over. It was a middle-aged woman named Yi. She did not awaken her totemic power, and also lived in the mountain foot district. She took some sewing jobs and was a good person. Xiao Xian often asked her to help him sew animal skin bags. Yesterday he took the fish and asked Yi to help him sew it. He also told her in detail how it looked like. He thought it would take 2 or 3 days, but it was done so quickly. "And Yi, is it done?" Xiao Xian asked with a smile. "Yes, it's not a problem." He handed the things over to Xiao Xian. Because he still had work to do, he did not stay for long. He left after giving the things to Xiao Xian. "What's this animal skin bag for?" Lang Jie, who was chopping wood, asked. "Of course it's for training." Xiao Xian didn't say much. He took the animal skin bag into the room and put it away. He hadn't tried it yet, so he didn't know if it would work. Lang Jie and the others didn't have much curiosity, so they continued with the final touches of the house. When they were almost done, Xiao Xian invited Lang Jie and the others to stay for lunch. In addition to fish, there were also some plant tubers and fruits. These plants were brought over by Lang Jie and the others. Among them, there were 2 young warriors who lived on the mountainside. They were interested in fish, but they didn't have much time to fish. When it was not their turn to hunt, they would prepare stone tools and train for the next hunt. Moreover, they didn't lack food, so they didn't join the fishing team. "You can all take one back later. I have a lot of fish here." Xiao Xian didn't lie. Yesterday afternoon, after he returned to the cave, he went to the river to fish with the kids in the cave. Usually, as long as he was free and there were no abnormalities in the river, fishing was a simple thing. Those fish were too stupid. Besides, when Xiao Xian joined the hunting team in the future, these kids would have to take care of him. Compared to that, a few fish were a small matter. The young warriors were a little embarrassed, but when they saw that Xiao Xian really didn't care about it, they accepted it. They planned to chop some wood later to strengthen Xiao Xian's wooden house. While they were eating, Gu came over with a big stone vat. "Old Ku asked me to bring it to you. It's to celebrate you having your own house. You can use it to store food or water." Gu put down the stone vat and looked at the wooden house that was almost finished. He said, "Not bad. I wanted to help, but it seems that I'm not needed anymore." Xiao Xian curled his lips. "If you really wanted to help, why did you come so late?" Lang Jie and the others knew that Gu was talking nonsense, but they didn't say anything out of respect for the old warrior. "Hey, is this stone vat for Xian?" Lang Jie asked a stupid question to change the topic. "Yes, old Ku specially made it for Xian." Gu emphasized old Ku, and specially, when he said that, and looked at Xiao Xian. According to Ji's understanding of old Ku, the old man was naturally very satisfied with Xiao Xian. In the past, old Ku also wanted to teach someone, but unfortunately, all of them were disappointing. They were either impatient or indecisive. When they encountered a medium high-quality stone core, they didn't dare to touch it. At that time, old Ku directly drove them away and didn't pay any attention to them. Many people thought that old Ku was unreasonable, but in fact old Ku was just too disappointed. But now that he finally had his eyes on someone, old Ku still had a long face. If he angered Xiao Xian this time, who would be better than Xiao Xian in the future? Gu looked at him anxiously. In fact, on the night of Xiao Xian's awakening after the sacrificial ceremony, Ku came back and asked Gu to exchange for a suitable big stone. After working for 2 consecutive nights, he finally made this stone vat. This stone vat was about the same size as the one Gu used to send food to the cave every day, but the workmanship was much better. The stone vat was almost the same thickness, and the inside was polished very smooth. The outside was not only polished very carefully, but also carved with some patterns such as mountains, rivers, birds and beasts. Xiao Xian had not seen many birds and beasts before, but Ku must have seen them when he went out hunting. People like Ku usually only thought about the practical aspects when making stone tools, and rarely did they make any fancy designs. Now that he made a water vat for Xiao Xian like this, it was obvious that Ku valued Xiao Xian very much. "This stone vat is so beautiful." Lang Jie and the others surrounded the stone vat and said enviously. Although they usually valued practicality more, and didn't care much about a water vat, who wouldn't like more beautiful objects? This stone vat was not only big, but also had special carvings and a matching stone lid. Usually, most people would just cover it with animal skins or straw mats, or just cover it with stone slabs. Very few people would have a cover for the entire water tank. Even the 2 young warriors who lived on the mountainside didn't have such a cover for their water tanks. "Yeah, what a good vat. I've lived for so many years, but I've never seen such a stone vat at home." Gu said. "Is the Ku you're talking about the one who was famous for making traps?" Ong, who came with Lang Jie, asked. "Yes, that's him." Lang Jie nodded. "I heard that many people wanted to learn from Ku, but later." Ong didn't continue. What happened later? Later on, those who wanted to learn from Ku were either driven away by anger, scolded, or forced to leave. Later on, gradually no one went to him and Ku moved from the mountain to the mountain foot area. Ku was indeed very famous in the tribe, but now very few people would mention him. Old Ku is very capable. Although he is very strict, you can learn good things from him. Gu said to Xiao Xian earnestly. Yes, Xian, are you learning from Ku now? You must hold on, Ku was really good at that time. Lang Jie also came over. In order to encourage Xiao Xian, he also told him about his experience of learning to set a ground bow from his grandfather. At that time he was also scolded like shit. At that time he was not only scolded but also beaten. Lang Ga's grandfather was also a very good warrior. Lang Jie couldn't escape from the old man's hands. Every time the children living around saw Lang Jie being beaten, they would laugh at him. At that time, Lang Jie felt very embarrassed and blamed his grandfather for a long time. Later, when Lang Jie really became a warrior, he realized his grandfather's good intentions. They hunted in the forest. Although the ground bow couldn't directly kill the beasts, it could still play a key role. Because of his excellent skill in setting a ground bow, Lang Jie was quickly accepted by the hunting team. Every time after a hunt, he would get a lot of food, at least more than others at the same level of strength. If you can learn more skills, your future path will be much easier. Not only will you be able to occupy a more important position in the hunting team, but if you are injured during a hunt and become like me and Old Ku, it will be inconvenient for you to hunt with the hunting team. But if you stay in the tribe, you can at least learn more skills to make a living and live a better life without starving," said Go. Therefore, Lang Jie and Gu both agreed that even if they were scolded like shit, they had to bear with it and learn as many skills as they could. It would be best if they could squeeze all the skills out of their opponents. Not to mention that Ku had a lot of good things hidden away, so they had to squeeze even more. Listening to their words, Xiao Xian nodded solemnly. I know what you mean. If you want to learn skills from others, you can ask for anything, but you can't be shameless. Lang Jie and Gu said, yes. Chapter 32. Xiao Xian naturally wanted to learn Old Ku's craftsmanship. In addition to making stone tools, he also knew how to set traps, which were very useful for hunting. However, it was still too early for Xiao Xian. He had no foundation, so he could only start with the most basic hammering skills, and slowly learn the more advanced ones later. Xiao Xian could feel Old Ku's attitude towards Xiao Xian. Old Ku had been helping him since a long time ago, but sometimes Old Ku's words could be easily misunderstood. For example, yesterday when he went to Old Ku to learn how to make stone tools, he tried to peel off the stone leaves, and was evaluated as useless. People who didn't understand him would definitely misunderstand. Fortunately, Xiao Xian had a flexible mind. He understood what Old Ku meant after thinking for a while. Seeing that Xiao Xian didn't reject their words, Gu immediately felt relieved. When he left, he planned to go to Old Ku's place later to ask for credit. It would be best if he could get something good from Old Ku as a reward. After helping Xiao Xian build the wooden house, Lang Jie and the others left. They had other things to do. After all, the first hunting trip was coming soon. Every time they went hunting, they risked their lives. They had to be well prepared to return safely. There were 2 hunting groups in the tribe. The 2 groups took turns to go hunting. When one went out, the other would be on duty in the tribe. They were responsible for the safety and defense of the tribe. After all, there were too many wild beasts in the mountains, and there were many old, weak, sick and disabled people in the tribe. Each hunting group was divided into 2 groups. According to what Lang Jie said, they were divided into 2 groups according to the warriors' abilities. The first group consisted mostly of totem warriors who lived on the mountainside or above, while the second group consisted mainly of people who lived on the mountainside. Lang Jie and the others were in the second group. When Xiao Xian went hunting, he would naturally follow them. After Lang Jie and the others left, Xiao Xian looked at the newly built wooden house. Caesar was curiously walking around the wooden house. If you shit in the house, I'll throw you out, Xiao Xian said. When they were in the cave, Xiao Xian had trained Caesar to go to a special place to shit like the children in the cave, or go directly outside the cave. Now that they had moved to a new place, he didn't know if the wolf could adapt quickly. We will live here in the future. We will make a wooden table, chairs and stools and, after lying on the bed and resting for a while, Xiao Xian took out the sewn animal skin bag that he had delivered in the morning. He went out to find some gravel and put it in the bag to weigh it. Xiao Xian found the gravel that was heavier. These gravel were thrown away as waste after the stone tools were made. There were still a lot of gravel and they were piled up like a small hill. Probably because the stone worms didn't like the gravel, they were rarely found there. Therefore not many people went there. When Lang Jie talked about weight training, Xiao Xian thought about it. Therefore he asked someone to help him sew a special animal skin bag. After filling it with gravel, it weighed nearly 200 pounds. Xiao Xian once wondered if these stones were metal ores, but after looking at them, he found that these stones were no different from the other stones in the gravel field except that they were harder and heavier. Xiao Xian naturally wanted to use ironware, but he didn't know how to make iron. More importantly, there were a lot of things in this world that were completely different from his previous life. There were too many things that couldn't be judged by common sense. Most of the stones here were unfamiliar to Xiao Xian. Therefore, instead of spending a lot of time to study them, Xiao Xian was more willing to solve the problem at hand. He didn't want to think about making copper or iron now. He tied a few animal skin bags to his arms and legs. After tying them, he moved a little and felt that it was okay. He could still carry another stone. It was obvious that a totemic warrior's body was really strong. Then, the weight training started with his daily movements. Although Xiao Xian couldn't carry 1,000 pounds with one arm like Gu, he could still lift a few hundred pounds. If it was in his previous life, Xiao Xian wouldn't believe that he could have such strength. When Xiao Xian was trying, he saw Caesar baring his teeth outside, so he untied the animal skin bag with gravel. As soon as he untied it, he heard someone calling his name outside. "Is Xian here?" Two very tall and strong warriors came over. They looked very young, about the same age as Lang Ga. Their bodies were full of strong muscles and their voices were rough and bold. "I'm Tua and he's Kiki. The shaman asked me to bring you something," Tua said. Tua was much calmer than Lang Ga. Although he looked at Xiao Xian, he didn't mean any harm. There was even a smile on his face. The shaman fulfilled his promise. On the first day that Xiao Xian had his own house, he sent people to bring food to him. It was also a compensation to Xiao Xian. There was a lot of meat, all of which had been processed and some had been pickled. In addition to the meat, there were several kinds of plant tubers and fresh fruits. In addition to these, there were 2 bags of herbs. Xiao Xian had seen one bag of herbs when he lived in the cave. It was mainly used to treat small illnesses, so he knew how to use it. Tua told Xiao Xian about the other bag, which was mainly used to treat external bleeding. As for the other person, he didn't seem to be a well-behaved person. And just now Tua said, "The shaman asked me to bring you something instead of we." Obviously, Kiki wasn't sent here by the shaman. After entering the house, Kiki kept staring at Caesar. He had his back to Xiao Xian, so Xiao Xian couldn't see his eyes. But judging from Caesar's expression, he knew it wasn't a friendly look. These warriors, who often went out to hunt, looked at animals as if they were prey. When they saw animals, they couldn't wait to stab them with their spears. Caesar's whole body was tense and he couldn't help showing his fangs. He was almost ready to fight. "Hey, this wolf can be raised like this," Kiki said. When Xiao Xian was wondering if this warrior despised Caesar for being too cowardly and not as ferocious as the wolves in the forest, Kiki smacked his lips and continued, "It can be eaten in half a year." Caesar immediately showed his 4 fangs to the warrior, and his eyes were alert. He made a growling sound from his throat, which was a warning. It seemed that he would pounce on the warrior and bite him in the next moment. "Good." The warrior quickly pulled out the stone knife from his waist and said excitedly. Tua, who was explaining the use of herbs to Xiao Xian, heard the warrior's words. His face stiffened and then twitched violently. He immediately put down his things and like a whirlwind rushed to Kiki, who was confronting Caesar with the knife, and punched him. "Good my ass. Put your knife away." Kiki was punched and flew out of the window and fell on the ground outside with a bang. Xiao Xian was speechless. Totem warriors were really simple and violent. After punching Tua, he walked to Xiao Xian and said, "He's always like this. He gets excited when he sees a beast. Don't worry, he's just used to it. He won't do it for real." After all, the wolf was the witch's card, so they didn't dare to do it for real. However, when he just finished his words, Kiki, who had just been punched, walked into the room as if nothing had happened. He moved his feet and walked to Caesar again. This time he didn't hold the knife but just rubbed his fingers. It was obvious that he hadn't given up yet. Tua had no other choice. The witch asked him to move things here, but he didn't expect to meet Kiki on the way. When he heard that they were going to the newly awakened warrior, the one who had surprised them the most at the ceremony, Kiki immediately became interested and followed them. Tua had wanted to talk more with this little warrior who was valued by the witch, but now he regretted letting Kiki come with him. If he let Kiki stay here, he might really fight with this wolf. This little wolf couldn't even take one punch from Kiki. What if it was killed? they would be scolded by the witch. Xiao Xian only saw a shadow flash in front of him. The next moment, Tuo appeared behind Kiki and dragged him out with his arm around Kiki's neck. At the same time he turned back and said to Xiao Xian, "We've delivered the things. We'll leave now. We'll talk later when you go hunting with us." After the two left, Caesar also relaxed. He sniffed around and then dragged out the animal skin bag that Kiki had just carried. It seemed that he was going to throw it out. Xiao Xian hurried to stop him. There were some dried fruits in the bag, many of which he hadn't tasted yet. It would be a waste to throw them away. While packing up, Xiao Xian recalled what Tuo had said. Tuo's last sentence meant that they were in the same hunting group as Xiao Xian. But Lang Jie and the others didn't mention these two people when they were talking. The first group. Chapter 33. Early the next morning, Xiao Xian tied the animal skin bag with gravel and ran to the training ground with Caesar. In the past, when he hadn't awakened, he had always been afraid. If he wasn't careful, he would be accidentally injured or even die. Now he was much more confident. At least he wasn't so weak that he couldn't take a beating. People in the tribe did not know too many tricks. They could only imagine a prey and make a more direct response according to the prey's habits. Some warriors would treat the cliff as some kind of wild beast, and then hit the cliff with their fists and feet. Therefore, if you saw sand and stones flying around on the mountain, don't be surprised. It was just a totemic warrior practicing. Just like that night at the shaman's place, the kid could break an ordinary stone spear with one punch. After Xiao Xian ran to the training ground, he chose a mountain and carried a stone. He ran from the foot of the mountain to the top. On the way he looked for a good stone and started to dig it. "Fortunately, I have such a special ability." Xiao Xian looked at the different shades of gray in his vision and sighed. Compared to the totemic power, Xiao Xian's other ability undoubtedly helped him a lot. It saved him a lot of time and effort to find it. Xiao Xian could not dig a middle or upper grade stone. If he hit it with his bare hands, it would hurt his own hands. After digging out the stone he liked, Xiao Xian looked at the sky. It was almost noon, so he carried the stone and ran back. He went back to the wooden house to eat something, and then went to Old Ku's place with the stone he dug out. In the afternoon, Xiao Xian arranged for him to learn how to make stone tools. Stone tools looked simple, but there were many skills involved. It was not just about knocking. First of all, you have to know how to identify the stone. Even stone cores of the same hardness may not be the same. Old Ku took out two similar stone cores and said. Xiao Xian watched as Old Ku directly knocked and peeled off one of them, while the other was heated and cooled. Old Ku explained to Xiao Xian the color change and cooling time of several kinds of stones after heating. Some stones would change in color and texture after being heated, while some would only change in texture, and some would have no reaction to the heating process at all. Sometimes the temperature had to be controlled during heating. It was necessary to understand what temperature was the best for peeling and what temperature was not suitable for peeling. As for this temperature, without a precise instrument to measure it, he could only rely on his feelings and experience. For example, if Xiao Xian felt the same temperature, Old Ku would be able to tell which one was hotter just by touching it. Different stones have different reactions to different temperatures, heating times, cooling changes, and other characteristics. Old Ku placed one of the two stone cores he had just taken out above the fire. Holding a stone stick in each hand, he placed the stone core in the middle. The fire burned very brightly as if it wanted to dry people out. Just by standing next to the fire for a short while, one would be covered in sweat. Old Ku's face was also covered in sweat, but his hands were still very steady. His movements of flipping the stone core were also very agile. Half an hour later, the stone core that was being heated above the fire turned from its original grayish-white color to a reddish-brown color. Old Ku then took the stone core away from the fire. However, he did not start peeling off the stone leaves. Instead, he waited for the stone core to cool down and the reddish-brown color to lighten before he began peeling off the pieces. The peeled stone leaves, whether they were slender or round, were almost the same thickness. What kind of control was needed to achieve this? At least in Xiao Xian's previous opinion, without advanced cutting tools, it would be impossible to achieve this level. The so-called ideal polishing was actually a very complicated process. Those who did not understand it would not be able to imagine it at all. After the theory came practice. Xiao Xian spent most of the afternoon practicing peeling stone leaves. Too much trash. Again. What the hell are you peeling off? Again. Poor control of the strength of the hammer. Again. Wait. Can this stone be peeled off directly? Did you eat too much fish? Take it and burn it? Some people who lived closer to Old Ku all knew that Old Ku's temper had become worse recently. When they talked about Xiao Xian, they all shook their heads and sighed, "Xian, that poor child." In fact, the situation in the house was not as bad as the people in the tribe thought. Old Ku was not merciful with his words, but he still put a lot of effort into teaching Xiao Xian the skills of peeling, so he was willing to part with the stone cores. Xiao Xian knocked off 5 stone cores in one afternoon. Not counting the one he brought, the other 4 were Old Ku's own. The stones were not bad, so it was a waste to use them as practice stones. Old Ku did not feel sorry for Xiao Xian, but he felt ashamed of himself. Every day Xiao Xian returned to his wooden house tiredly from Old Ku's place. His muscles were stinging and the pain was getting more and more intense. Setting up a stone pot and lighting a fire was painful enough to make him grit his teeth. The area between his thumb and index finger was even more painful. He held the stone hammer even more tightly. It took him several tries to set up the stone pot successfully. Xiao Xian felt like the one being hammered wasn't the stone core but himself. However, he slept very well that night, and when he woke up, his whole body felt refreshed, as if the muscle pain from yesterday was just an illusion. Xiao Xian did not know if this was a totemic warrior's own ability, or another special ability. Early in the morning, Xiao Xian planned to go to the training ground as usual. Yesterday he saw a place with good stones. He could dig out some good stone cores. This way he would not have to use Old Ku's stones all the time. What if he made Old Ku poor? As he walked, Xiao Xian felt that something was wrong. People who were not so active usually got up early and gathered in the same direction. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian patted his forehead. He almost forgot. Today was the day that Lang Jie and the others went out to hunt. Xiao Xian took Caesar to the place where the crowd gathered. There was a road from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain, almost in a straight line. This road was higher than other places and no one had built a house on it. The hunting team would pass through this road when they went out or came back, so they would not disturb the other residents in the tribe. Over time this path also took on a different meaning. People in the tribe called it the Path of Glory. It was like a grand farewell to warriors who were about to go to the battlefield. People had mixed feelings. Some were proud, some were heavy, and some were hopeful. They did not know if their families were still safe when the hunting team came back. Would they be able to bring back enough food? Most of the people gathered on both sides of the Path of Glory were the families of the warriors who went out this time, from the elderly to the children. When the hunting team came back, these people would be here to welcome them. And the 2 times their feelings would be completely different. However, besides welcoming and sending off the hunting team for the warriors in the hunting team, this road also represented a kind of meaning. It was an affirmation of their own strength. If Xiao Xian were to describe it, for many warriors, this road was a road to show off their wealth. When they came back from the hunt, it was clear who got how much food, just like the disclosure of assets. Rich people naturally did not lack reputation, status, or women. These were all things worth showing off. "They're coming!" someone shouted. Xiao Xian looked over. There were about 200 people coming down from the mountain, and the one walking at the front was the leader of the hunting team. Xiao Xian had seen him on the night of the sacrificial ceremony. Not only the leader but also several people behind the leader, Xiao Xian also felt familiar. They were all the people who danced by the fire pit that night. The people walking down the mountain, no matter if they were smiling or looking serious, each of their steps was full of momentum like a general on the battlefield. At the back of the team, among the tall warriors, several children who were obviously shorter than the others were very eye-catching. Among them were the leader's grandson, Mao, and Fei, who had shown off in front of Xiao Xian before. "Hey, who are those children? Of course they are strong enough to join the first hunting team. They are the best among the awakened warriors this year." "Hey, is that Mao? No wonder he is the leader's grandson." The crowd was talking about it. Sai's father pointed at Fei and the others in the hunting team and said to Sai, "Look, they are about the same age as you and awakened in the same batch. They can join the first hunting team. What about you?" Sai straightened his neck. "Why don't you live on the mountain?" Sai's father choked and directly threw 2 punches and 2 slaps at him. Chapter 34. After the hunting team left, the tribe returned to its usual pace of life. However, compared to last year, the riverside was much more lively this time. After experiencing the initial fear of the unknown creatures in the river, the people no longer feared the creatures in the river because of the benefits brought by the big-mouthed piranhas. It turned out that the creatures in the river were not so scary after all. As long as they were careful, they could get enough food. Under the joint management of Tu and Jieba, the life in the cave was quite stable. With the daily fishing activities and enough food, the small bodies of the children were not as weak as before. At the same time, the children in the cave were getting more and more united. They had no choice but to work together to fight against the enemy. The ability of a single person was too small, and they did not even have the advantage when fishing. As for the stone worms, Xiao Xian would take Caesar to catch them every 2 days. After catching enough stone worms, they would store them for the children in the cave. Stones could not trap the stone worms. Some people used stone jars to put the stone worms in, but the next day they found that there was a hole in the jar and the stone worms were gone. However, Tu discovered by chance that wooden jars and straw ropes, which were not as hard as stones, could trap the worms better than stone jars. Even if they could not be trapped for too long, a day or two would not be a problem. This solved the problem of Caesar running to the cave every day. Xiao Xian still went to the training ground to look for stone cores in the morning, and went to Old Ku's place to learn the stone skills in the afternoon. After more than 10 days, Xiao Xian felt that he was much stronger than when he had just awakened his totemic power. He was also more skilled in controlling the totemic power, and could switch between the 2 powers in his body more freely. It seemed that learning the stone skills was also beneficial to controlling the totemic power. Xiao Xian ran through the woods like a monkey, heading towards the place he had chosen yesterday. His figure flashed and the branches swayed slightly. The sound was very low like a breeze. Caesar ran behind him. This place was still within the range of the tribe's guards, so Xiao Xian did not need to worry about any ferocious beasts. The reason why he deliberately controlled the sound was just for the future hunting activities. There were many times when one had to be stealthy when hunting. One had to quietly approach the prey and hide one's aura. If one's movements were slightly bigger, it would alert the prey or other ferocious beasts that one could not defeat. Xiao Xian had seen Lang Jie and Mai's stealth ability before. Mai moved stealthily, so he was still some distance away from them. Xiao Xian also saw many children who had awakened in the same batch as him, including Sai in the mountains where he was training. "Hey, isn't that Xian?" Sai's father looked at the figure that flashed through the woods and said. For those who had not awakened their totemic power, Xiao Xian's speed was naturally very fast and hard to catch. However, for other totemic warriors who had awakened their totemic power many years ago, it was nothing. Sai jumped on the spot with a big rock in his hand. He had already jumped more than 100 times with the rock. Hearing his father's words, Sai turned his head and looked over. Xiao Xian was no longer in the woods. "What are you looking at? Keep dancing." Sai's father hit Sai but with a stone stick and scolded him. "You can't even beat Xian, who is 2 years younger than you. Why can't I beat him?" Sai was not convinced. "Hey, you're still being stubborn. If I say so, then so be it. Just jump. You can't rest until you've jumped 200 times. Sai's father hit Sai twice with the stick. "I've already jumped 172 times. He just needed to jump another 28 times. Sai counted in his mind. He was a little happy when he thought about it. Should he go catch flying squirrels or look for food during the rest time? He wondered if there were any more of those green and crunchy fruits that he had eaten 2 days ago. Sai swallowed his saliva and was full of expectation. Then he heard his father say with his eyes wide open, "Do you think I don't know how to count? You've only jumped 127 times. There are 73 more." Sai was so angry that he almost threw the big rock away. However, his father's way of doing things was always right. Even if he was wrong, he had to admit it. Debate with him? He would be beaten. Damn it. Sai couldn't beat his father, so he took it out on Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian, who didn't know that he was being punished again, was busy picking stones. There were many stones in the training ground, but very few of them could be used to make stone tools. Even if he relied on his special ability to identify the grade of the stones, he couldn't find the most suitable one quickly. Because even if it was a good stone, it might not be suitable for making stone chips. Therefore, every morning Xiao Xian would spend a few hours picking stones, and then bring back stone cores that were good and suitable for making stone chips. After following Old Ku for a few days, Xiao Xian's ability to identify stones had improved a lot. He was no longer as clueless as he used to be, where he could see all kinds of stones the same. While Xiao Xian was looking for stone cores, Caesar was bored, so he went to stop the flying stone squirrels that were digging holes and jumping around in the mountains. Every time Xiao Xian finished picking stone cores, he would find several dead flying stone squirrels next to Caesar. Sometimes Xiao Xian felt guilty when he looked at Caesar. Caesar was a good wolf, but he had raised him into this. In the afternoon, Xiao Xian brought the selected stone cores to Old Ku's place. Old Ku taught Xiao Xian how to determine the best angle and surface for making stone chips, and which stones were suitable for what. After that, Old Ku sat at the side and watched Xiao Xian make stone chips. After taking off his animal skin coat, Xiao Xian picked up the stone hammer and started hammering with his bare upper body. In the first few days, his animal skin coat was soaked with sweat, and water could be wrung out with a little twist. Later, Xiao Xian threw his animal skin coat aside to avoid the smell of sweat. Ding, ding, ding. The hammering sound that would be heard every afternoon began. 1 hammer, 2 hammers, 50, 51, 100 hammers, 500 hammers. As if he didn't know what fatigue was, Xiao Xian kept knocking on the stone core. The huge stone core became smaller and smaller as more and more stone leaves fell from it than a few days ago. After hammering the first stone, Xiao Xian did not rest. He continued hammering the second stone, the third stone. After hammering the third stone, Xiao Xian felt as if he had fallen into a water tank and was fished out. After drinking some water, Xiao Xian stood at the side and listened to Old Ku explain the details that he needed to pay attention to during the grinding process. He explained the shape of the stone chips, how to grind them, and how to grind the rest of the stone core. Old Ku said that every stone had its own story. Even the best stoneware maker might not be able to decipher every stone. However, every time Old Ku explained to Xiao Xian, he would try his best to teach him everything that he had learned so far. Xiao Xian listened attentively. Many of the seemingly indifferent words actually hid many skills. After resting for a while and listening to Old Ku's teachings, Xiao Xian continued. However, he was not hammering but grinding. Whether it was hammering or grinding, if he wanted to reach Old Ku's high standards, he had to be more careful during the grinding process. He had to control his totemic power more precisely. This was not an easy task. During the grinding process, Xiao Xian was immersed in it. All of his consciousness was focused on the stone that he was grinding. It was not obvious, but once the grinding was completed and he regained consciousness, he would feel a throbbing pain in his head. Sometimes it would feel like he was being stabbed by an awl. It was so painful that his forehead would be covered in sweat. Old Ku said that this was normal. He had experienced this in the past. Although it was difficult, the results were obvious. Xiao Xian's control of his totemic power was more precise. Old Ku, who was sitting next to him, had a satisfied look in his eyes. Xiao Xian's growth was far beyond his imagination. After so many years, Old Ku had seen many people who learned how to grind stone, but none of them could do what Xiao Xian did. Many people might not be able to do what Xiao Xian did in half a year or even 1 or 2 years. Of course, there were those who did it well. For example, Lang Jie took less than 50 days. Lang Ge's grandfather even showed off in front of Old Ku. However, how long did Xiao Xian learn? Only 10 days. Old Ku actually wanted to go up the mountain and have a chat with the old guy who made the ground bow. However, he decided to wait a little longer. Just as he was thinking about what kind of expression the old guy would have when he found out, Ku's eyes suddenly widened, as if he had seen something incredible. Totemic patterns appeared on Xiao Xian's body. This was not strange. During this period of time when he was learning stone crafting skills, Xiao Xian would use his totemic power. Naturally, the totemic patterns on his body would also appear. However, Old Ku was not shocked by the totemic patterns. What he saw in front of him was even more unbelievable than when he saw Xiao Xian use his totemic power. Everyone in the tribe knew that when a newly awakened warrior awakened by the fire pit, all the totemic patterns would appear on his body. After the ceremony, the totemic patterns would shrink. The totemic patterns that originally covered the whole arm would shrink to the upper arm, slightly over the shoulder. The totemic patterns on the legs would also shrink. Therefore, when a warrior used his totemic power after awakening, the totemic patterns that appeared would be no more than the elbow or knee. This was the sign of a beginner totemic warrior. One day, when the totemic patterns reached the elbow or knee, it would be the time for a beginner totemic warrior to become an intermediate totemic warrior. This was the most direct and effective way to identify a totemic warrior's level. When warriors were hunting, when they faced countless dangerous beasts and threats to their lives, they would make breakthroughs again and again. Only then would their totemic patterns extend. However, the extension was limited. Many people with decades of hunting experience could not extend their totemic patterns beyond the elbow or knee. In other words, they were still at the beginner totemic warrior level, and their progress was extremely slow. However, what about Xiao Xian's totemic patterns? Old Ku's eyelids twitched. He clearly remembered that when Xiao Xian first came to learn stone crafting skills and used his totemic power, the totemic patterns on his upper arm were the same as those of other newly awakened warriors. They were only slightly over the shoulder. But now, the totemic patterns on Xiao Xian's upper arm had already extended to the length of a little finger. Before this, Old Ku did not pay attention to the totemic patterns on Xiao Xian's arm. Just now, he was only thinking about when Xiao Xian could become an intermediate totemic warrior. He glanced at the totemic patterns on Xiao Xian's upper arm, but he did not expect such a discovery. He could see the slightest error in the stone crafting, so how could he not see the length of the totemic patterns on Xiao Xian's arm? Don't underestimate the length of a little finger. This was something that some people could not achieve even after several years. But how long had it been since Xiao Xian awakened? At this speed, how far could a beginner totemic warrior be? Old Ku only felt his eyelids twitch even more. Chapter 35. Ku Xian rubbed his twitching eyelids and stood up from the stone bench. Since he was missing a leg, he swayed a little when he stood up. Naturally, Xiao Xian noticed him. Xiao Xian looked at Old Ku in confusion as he put down the stone tool and grindstone that were about to take shape. He was in a good state just now and didn't feel like he made any mistakes. His polishing process was also up to Old Ku's standards, but what was with Old Ku's what the fuck look? Xian you. Ku Xian stuttered. You. After a long while, Ku squeezed out a sentence. How do you usually train? Xiao Xian didn't know what Old Ku meant, but he still explained his training schedule in detail. Of course, he didn't tell Old Ku Xian about his special ability. In fact, rather than training, it was better to say that he was preparing to polish stone tools. Many of the children who had awakened at the same time were either training their strength or practicing throwing. Only Xiao Xian spent most of his time looking for stone cores. Some people even secretly laughed at Xiao Xian for not doing his job properly. After pondering for a while, Ku Xian didn't think there was anything wrong with what he said. Xiao Xian was very hardworking and showed a strong drive when he was polishing stone tools. This was also the reason why Ku Xian was willing to teach him. However, when he was learning stone tools, he also put in a lot of effort. Why didn't he improve as fast as Xiao Xian? Old Ku couldn't figure it out. He could only attribute the reason to Xiao Xian's extraordinary talent. No wonder he awakened at the age of 10. After calming down, Old Ku waved his hand and motioned for Xiao Xian to continue. He thought for a while and stopped him. He took out a wide grass curtain and divided the polishing process into two parts. He motioned for Xiao Xian to go to the inner part. Although confused, Xiao Xian still did as he was told. Old Ku must have his reasons for doing this. Through the grass curtain, Old Ku could see the little figure polishing stone. Old Ku slowly rubbed a stone leaf in his hand. He seemed to have thought of something and his frown relaxed. He couldn't help but chuckle. When the sun was about to set, Xiao Xian came out from the inner compartment covered in sweat and handed the polished stone tools to Old Ku for inspection. There were more stone leaves and stone cores to be polished today, so it ended much later than usual. However, Old Ku did not check the stoneware one by one like he did a few days ago. Instead, he casually pushed the pile of stoneware aside, glanced at it for a while and then stopped looking at it. Instead, he said to Xiao Xian, "You can go back now. From tomorrow onwards you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want." Okay, I got it. In fact, Xiao Xian had wanted to make something of his own for a long time, but his skills were too bad at that time. The things he made were completely different from what he had in mind, and he always failed halfway. Now that Old Ku said so, it was also in line with Xiao Xian's wishes. To make a satisfactory stone tool, the process involved included peeling stone leaves, polishing, pressing, heat treatment, and so on. The tools needed included hammers, pressure rods, plungers, grindstones, stone anvils, and other fixed objects. Xiao Xian didn't have a complete set of tools in his wooden house, so he could only come to Old Ku's place every day to make something. However, Xiao Xian didn't dare to think too much at first, so he started with the stone tools he was familiar with in the tribe. The next day, Xiao Xian took the stone cores he had picked for the whole morning to Old Ku's place and started polishing. Xiao Xian wanted to polish a double-winged stone arrowhead, which was the most used stone arrowhead in the tribe. Lang Jie used it a lot. Old Ku had also told Xiao Xian the essentials of making stone arrowheads. The rest could only be learned through polishing, and Old Ku would also point out some details to pay attention to. After a few days, Old Ku didn't sit next to Xiao Xian and watch him polish. He didn't need to say anything because Xiao Xian could already do it very well. Leaning on a wooden stick, Old Ku took out a wooden box filled with all kinds of stone tools, big and small, and placed it outside the house. Inside were the stone tools Xiao Xian had polished these days. Most of them were spearheads and arrowheads, and the style of the stone tools they polished was somewhat different from Old Ku's. In the past few days Old Ku had changed his rules. In the afternoon he didn't let people into the house. In the morning he would take out a lot of finished stone tools and place them on the table. If anyone took a fancy to them they could quickly exchange them. Afternoon, Old Ku would pack up and enter the house. He wouldn't come out for the whole afternoon. Therefore when they saw Old Ku putting out the things at this time, some people gathered around. "Hey Old Ku, why are you putting things out at this time today?" "Hey Old Ku, these things aren't made by Xian, right?" Many people knew that Xiao Xian was learning stone tools from Old Ku, but no one was optimistic about it. Some people secretly discussed how long Xiao Xian could last. Would he be like those people before him who couldn't help but leave after a few days, or would he be forced out by Old Ku? They didn't expect him to last until now. Looking at Old Ku, he didn't seem to be angry. It was really strange. However, the person who said that the stone tools were made by Xiao Xian laughed after saying it. The people who came with him also just laughed and didn't take it seriously. After all, in their opinion, that kid had only been learning from Old Ku for a few days. It was absolutely impossible for him to make such a successful stone product. They were just joking about Old Ku. This stone arrowhead is well polished. It's perfect for laying bows and setting traps. Hey, the barbs are well polished. I like them. A person squatted down and began to pick out the stone arrowheads he liked. Seeing that someone had already started, the others stopped joking around and started to pick the stoneware they liked. They were afraid that the good stuff would be taken away by someone else. After all, the stoneware made by Old Ku was much better than the others. "Hey Old Ku, did you change your style?" The arrowheads didn't have such long barbs in the past. A warrior picked out a stone arrowhead and touched the wings on it. Ku, who was sitting there, just kept a straight face and didn't answer. The warriors who came to exchange their stone tools were already used to Old Ku's behavior. They didn't expect Old Ku to explain. It wasn't strange for a stone tool maker to change his style. Hunting consumed a lot of stone tools. Because many of them were disposable, unlike metals they couldn't be reused. So the scrap rate was especially high. This also led to the warriors preparing a lot of stone tools before every hunting trip. The last hunting team had been out for almost 20 days. Generally speaking, the hunting team wouldn't go out for more than 20 days. Even if they were in trouble, they wouldn't go out for more than 30 days. After all, the warriors' families were still in the tribe. If they didn't come back, their families would starve. So, after some calculations, the hunting team that went out would be back soon. The other team was also preparing. They were just waiting for the people who went out to come back. Then they would hand over the tribe's affairs and set off for hunting. Of course, the more stone tools they had, the better. They will be back in these 2 days. I saw someone bring the wounded back in the morning. This time, 2 of them were seriously injured, but their lives weren't in danger. I heard that no one died. Someone said while picking. "So, we are also going to set off? I have to go back and get more things to exchange with Old Ku." "Didn't you say 2 were injured? Who were they?" The crowd began to talk again, but their hands didn't slow down. Every time they saw a stone tool they would grab it tightly in their hands. Those who were slower than them could only regret that they didn't make the first move. "If you want to exchange, then hurry up and get out." Old Ku waved his arm with a cold face. If they wanted to talk they should go somewhere else. Xian was still polishing in the house. What if they disturbed him? In the eyes of the crowd, Old Ku was too difficult to get along with. It seemed that he didn't care about anything except stone tools. He was also very fierce when he scolded people. But in fact, Old Ku valued Xiao Xian more than anyone else. When these people began to talk, Old Ku was not happy and immediately drove them away. The crowd didn't get angry. They stopped talking and quickly went back to pick. When almost all the things were put on the table, no one came back. Old Ku picked up the remaining small stone tools and put them into the wooden box. He shook his head and whispered to himself, "Why don't I like these small stone tools? In fact, as long as they are used well, they are much more lethal than those big ones." When Xiao Xian finished polishing for the day and dragged his tired body back, the hunting team that went out also came back before sunset. Chapter 36. In the cheers, the hunting team walked on the path of glory, leaving long shadows in the sunset. The strong warriors were carrying much bigger prey on their backs, like an ant carrying a quail egg. They carried some on their shoulders, carried some on their backs, and even dragged some with straw ropes. The harvest was plentiful, and it was truly a rewarding journey. It was said that no one in the hunting team was killed this time, only 2 were seriously injured. The injured ones were with the shaman, and their condition had stabilized. With the strong physique of the tribesmen, it wouldn't take long for them to be able to jump around again. After a whole afternoon of non-stop grinding, Xiao Xian was too tired. After finding Lang Jie Mai and the others, he turned around and went back to the cabin. He didn't rush to greet them with cheers like the others. At the front of the team, Mao, who was obviously shorter than the others, was carrying 2 big wild boars on his back. He was very proud of himself. Listening to the praises from the crowd, he couldn't stop his mouth from grinning. Felt so good. He straightened his back again and turned his head to look at the crowd, just in time to see the back of Mai and Caesar leaving. Because he was too tired, Xiao Xian didn't have much energy either. Looking from the back, he did seem to be in a bad mood. He must have been defeated by me, Mao thought. Carrying 2 big wild boars, Mao was still thinking about how to defeat Xiao Xian in the future when he joined the hunting team. After a night's rest, Xiao Xian felt full of energy. Even the soreness in his muscles had disappeared, as if he didn't persist in grinding for so long yesterday. As usual, he picked stone cores in the morning, and went to Old Ku's place in the afternoon. But today Old Ku gave Xiao Xian half a day off so that Xiao Xian could have some rest. Looking at the results of his grinding these days, Xiao Xian picked some stone cores and took them with him. Old Ku only took out half of the finished stoneware, and the other half was kept by Old Ku for Xiao Xian's own use. Therefore Xiao Xian still had a lot of stoneware in stock. Xiao Xian used 2 net bags woven with straw rope to carry some of the stone tools he had selected. Then he carried them up the mountain. When Xiao Xian arrived, Lang Jie was still sleeping. After going out to hunt, when there was no shift, he would always sleep for 3 or 4 days. What's the matter? Lang Jie yawned, his drooping eyelids almost closing. Oh, I just came to give you something. Go back to sleep. Xiao Xian placed one of the net bags on the stone table in the room and planned to leave. Originally he wanted to listen to Lang Jie talk about hunting, but now it seemed that he had to wait for a few days. For me? Although he was sleepy, Lang Jie was still very curious about what Xiao Xian had brought. When the bag was opened and he saw the polished stone arrowheads inside, Lang Ga's squinted eyes suddenly widened. His eyes flashed as he took out an arrowhead and began to examine it carefully. Xiao Xian made the wings on the arrowhead according to the size and shape Lang Jie was used to. Therefore, the barbs were longer than the others because Lang Jie was used to using them. If he changed it without permission, Lang Jie might not be used to it, so Xiao Xian didn't add any other ideas. Lang Jie looked at the arrowheads in his hands and became more and more surprised. The arrowheads in front of him were very well polished, and the most important thing was that the wings were almost perfect. The wings of the arrowheads could play a role in balancing the flight of the arrowhead, allowing the arrowhead to hit the target more accurately. If the wings were slightly out of place, the hunting effect would be greatly reduced. In order to increase the lethality of the arrowheads, Lang Jie polished the wings of the arrowheads himself. The edges of the arrowheads were more prominent, the tips were sharp, and there were 2 long barbs. Lang Jie had always felt that only the arrowheads polished by himself were easy to use. The arrowheads polished by others, even his grandfather, might not be easy to use. But now, looking at the arrowheads in his hands, Lang Jie was very surprised. With just a glance and a weight, he knew that these arrowheads would be very easy to use. The arrowheads in his hands looked almost exactly the same as the arrowheads that Lang Jie polished himself. No, they weren't exactly the same. The arrowheads in front of him were polished more perfectly. Usually, when Lang Jie polished the arrowheads himself because of the large demand, he didn't spend time polishing some details. But these arrowheads in front of him? Hey Xian, thank you, I like them very much. By the way, please thank Old Ku for me. Thank him for the arrowheads he polished. In Lang Ga's opinion, these arrowheads were naturally polished by Old Ku, and Xiao Xian naturally asked for them from Old Ku before sending them over. Lang Jie stretched out his thumb and touched the wings of the arrowhead. TSK, the edges of the arrowheads were very well polished. As expected of a master's product. Xiao Xian, who had just walked out of the door, turned back and smiled. I'll help you pass on the message. By the way, I polished those arrowheads myself. You can see if they're good for you when you use them. Hearing Xiao Xian's reply, Lang Jie, who was touching the arrowheads, froze. He raised his eyes and looked at Xiao Xian in astonishment, the muscles on his face trembling violently. Wait. Lang Jie strode in front of Xiao Xian, holding the arrowhead in his hand. He stared at Xiao Xian and said word by word, "You made this?" Xiao Xian nodded. "Yes, it's passable, right?" "Passable?" Lang Jie stared at Xiao Xian with bloodshot eyes. Even his breathing became heavy. If these were considered passable, then what was the point of what he was doing now? Stone slag. Xiao Xian didn't quite understand what Lang Jie meant. He had some arrowheads given by Lang Ga. Because he had used them once, Lang Jie didn't want to take them out for hunting, but it would be a waste to throw them away, so he gave them to Xiao Xian for training. When Lang Jie and the others first started training, they also used second-hand arrowheads, which was very common in the tribe. Xiao Xian's arrowheads were made according to the ones given by Lang Ga. There were some flaws on the arrowheads, but it didn't affect their use. Xiao Xian always thought that the small flaws were caused by the wear and tear of the arrowheads. After seeing them, Old Ku didn't comment on them. But for the arrowheads made by Xiao Xian himself, Old Ku commented that they were passable. This was also the reason why Xiao Xian said they were passable. Lang Jie looked at Xiao Xian with a complicated expression. Maybe it was because he had a grandfather who was a stoneware maker. He also made stoneware himself and thought that he was quite talented in stoneware. Now that he had some success, even if he couldn't catch up with his grandfather, he would definitely surpass him in 10 years. Moreover, among his peers, his ability to make stoneware was above most, especially when it came to arrowheads. Almost no one in his generation could surpass him. But now, in front of him, there was a 10-year-old kid who had just awakened and learned stoneware for less than 30 days. The arrowheads he made were actually better than his own. With his eyesight, he could naturally see that this kind of stone tool could not be made with enough time and meticulous polishing. Moreover, the arrowheads in his hand were very smooth and did not have many stagnation points. It was possible that these arrowheads were all polished in a short period of time. Why did he change so much after coming back from a hunt? I'm only going out for 20 days, not 2 years. Thinking about how he gave Xiao Xian a batch of second-hand stoneware arrowheads full of flaws before he went hunting, Lang Ga's face turned red and he wanted to bang his head into the ground. Although he was usually thick-skinned, when it came to stoneware, he was deeply influenced by his grandfather. His views and thoughts were completely different from usual. Deep breaths. Deep breaths again. Lang Jie stretched out a trembling finger and pointed outside. "You don't come out for 3 days." After saying that, Lang Jie put down the curtain and didn't sleep. He strode to the small room where he usually used to grind stoneware and began to work. In another room next to Lang Ga's room, an old man with a head full of white hair walked out. Although he was old, his body still looked healthy. It wasn't a problem for him to carry a stone that weighed 100 pounds. This man was Lang Ga's grandfather. The old man had just taken an afternoon nap and was chewing on a piece of jerky when he was about to go down the mountain to meet some friends. When he heard the sound of stoneware grinding, he thought that one of his sons was preparing stoneware for hunting. When he turned his head, he saw his grandson, who was supposed to be sleeping soundly in his room, appear in the stoneware room through the open window. The old man was so excited that he almost choked on the jerky. His eyes were as big as stone balls. He looked at Lang Jie as if he was looking at a rare ferocious beast in the forest. Holy shit. This little bastard, every time he came back from a hunt, he would be like a softy who couldn't get up without sleeping for 3 or 4 days. How strange. Xiao Xian, who had just been yelled at by Lang Jie, "Don't come out for 3 days," was a little confused. What was wrong with Lang Jie? Did he not wake up and have low blood pressure? Shaking his head, Xiao Xian carried another net bag and walked up the mountain. Mai's place was slightly higher. Chapter 37. As an intermediate totem warrior, Mai held an important position in the hunting team. He had a lot of work to do back in the tribe, so he was not as free as Lang Ga. When Xiao Xian arrived, Mai was assigning patrol tasks to 2 warriors. Xiao Xian waited for the 2 warriors to come out before he went in. Inside the house, Mai was processing the meat he brought back. He only did some preliminary processing during the hunt, so he had to chop them into small pieces and marinate them. He also had to sort them out for other uses. "You're here?" Seeing Xiao Xian enter the house, Mai waved his hand and threw a piece of bloody meat the size of a winter melon to Xiao Xian. "Take it back and eat it. You're a totem warrior now, so you eat a lot. You'll get hungry during training." Many people would reduce their training time when they were short of food. After all, once a totemic warrior started training, they would consume more energy, so naturally they would need to eat more. Especially for warriors like Xiao Xian who had just awakened, it was the time for them to grow so they could not lack food. "Thank you, Uncle Mai." Xiao Xian took the meat and handed the net bag to Mai. "This is for you." Mai put down the stone axe and looked at the net bag curiously. "You made it yourself?" "Well, it's definitely not as good as yours, Uncle Mai. But it's still okay." Xiao Xian scratched his head and said. Compared to Langa's stone arrowheads, the ones Xiao Xian gave Mai didn't have as many stone arrowheads. Instead, most of them were spearheads for throwing during hunting. After all, the two of them had different responsibilities in the hunting team, so the stone arrowheads they used were naturally different. Mai had heard from Lang Jie that Xiao Xian was learning stone tools from old Ko. But it had not been long, so Mai did not expect to see many exquisite things. Xiao Xian was thoughtful enough to send him something, so he did not want to discourage this kid. Mai smiled and pulled open the net bag, intending to say some words of encouragement. "Actually, you can't rush into crafting stone tools. It's already very good that you're able to do this. In the future." His voice came to an abrupt halt. Mai looked at the well-polished spearheads in the net bag and swallowed back the words of encouragement he was about to say. The sharpened spearhead was the same as Mai's usual spearhead. Its spine was slightly higher, and the blade of the spearhead was also very sharp. The spearhead's blade gathered into a sharp point, and there were no traces of it being beaten. Clearly, a lot of effort had been put into the sharpening. Unlike the spearheads used by many warriors, the spearheads Mai liked to use had grooves for drinking blood on both sides of the spine. Xiao Xian also had grooves for drinking blood. Just like Lang Jie, Mai also gave Xiao Xian a stone tool for training. It was a spear that he had used before. However, when he gave it out, he did not expect to receive such a gift in return. These, are you really polishing them yourself?" Mai looked at Xiao Xian and saw Xiao Xian nodding. Mai then looked at the stone tools in his hands. He did not expect Xiao Xian to have such a gift. In this case, even if Xiao Xian could not improve his strength in the future, he would be able to live a peaceful life in the tribe. He would not have to starve. After being stunned for a while, Mai laughed. "Good. Very good." Unlike Lang Jie, Mai did not spend so much effort on crafting stone tools, nor did he care much about them. Therefore, when he saw Xiao Xian's stone tools, he only admired them. After putting away the spearheads, Mai asked about Xiao Xian's training during this period, and gave some suggestions. He did think highly of Xiao Xian, but he also agreed that the newly awakened one should train more. There was no need to rush to join the hunting team. Otherwise they would be like Hoodlum, who was too eager for success. However, when the time came, they would make a lot of mistakes and become a burden. After thinking for a while, Mai reached out his hand and said to Xiao Xian, "Punch my hand and let me see your strength." After a totemic warrior's ability was improved, his strength would continue to increase. That was why Mai wanted to use this method to see Xiao Xian's results during this period of training. However, he did not expect Xiao Xian to improve much. After all, Xiao Xian had spent most of his time making stone tools. "Okay." Xiao Xian put aside the meat in his hand, and stretched his arms and legs. In fact, he did not know how different he was from the other kids, except for his special ability. He also did not know what level he was at now. It would be good for his future training if he could get some advice from Mai. Since he wanted to test his fist strength, he had to use his totemic power. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Xian mobilized the totemic power in his body. Immediately, clear totemic patterns appeared on his face, and quickly spread from his face to his neck. Mai was satisfied to see Xiao Xian mobilizing his totemic power so quickly. He was much better than the other kids who had been preparing for a long time. Xiao Xian suddenly stomped on the ground with his right foot, and rushed towards Mai at a high speed. He punched Mai's hand. Bang! The fist hit the palm, but it was like a collision between rocks. Xiao Xian felt as if he had hit a hard steel wall, which was completely different from the rock he had hit in his training. Xiao Xian staggered back 2 steps and took back his fist. He grinned and rubbed his fist. Actually, it wasn't just his fist that was hurting. His entire arm was aching. Sure enough, there was such a big difference between a newly awakened totemic warrior and an intermediate totemic warrior. Looking at Mai, he looked like he had just hit a piece of tofu, and his hand was not even red. Xiao Xian also noticed that the totemic patterns on Mai's body had indeed gone past his elbow, and some of them had even spread along his forearm. Unlike him, his totemic patterns had just gone past his shoulder. In fact, Mai was not so calm. He looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. Compared to the pain in his hand, He had seen the totemic patterns on Xiao Xian's shoulder, but now they had disappeared. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Xiao Xian's punch was indeed stronger than most of the newly awakened totemic warriors. Winter was over, and the weather was getting warmer. The temperature was rising day by day, and he had to train every day. For convenience, Xiao Xian was now wearing a sleeveless animal skin coat, so the totemic patterns on his shoulder were naturally exposed. Maybe Mai did not have old Ku's eyesight, but compared to most people, he was much better. Again. Use all your strength, Mai said to Xiao Xian. Seeing that Mai had other ideas, Xiao Xian did not hesitate. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Xian mobilized the totemic power in his body again. In his mind, the flames wrapped around the horns suddenly grew, and the totemic power was mobilized to the limit. Feeling the surging power flowing through every muscle and every bone, Xiao Xian's mental state reached its peak in an instant. After working on stone tools for so long, his precise control of the totemic power had shown its advantage. He was very familiar with the instantaneous accumulation of power, and he could feel it every day. Every time this happened, Xiao Xian would have a strong sense of confidence. At the same time, the flame patterns on Xiao Xian's body became abnormally bright, and he could almost feel the burning heat of the flames. The moment he exerted force on his leg, the ground trembled slightly. Whoosh! Before the punch arrived, the wind from the punch had already arrived. Although Xiao Xian was only a junior totem warrior who had just awakened, and he hadn't trained his strength to the extreme, the sudden explosion of his fist brought about an unparalleled momentum. Looking at the kid in front of him who only reached his waist, Mai's eyes widened slightly. Bang! A clear cracking sound could be heard. Xiao Xian suddenly felt a sharp pain in his entire arm, as if he was being roasted on a bonfire. The burning pain was endless. Mai's face even stiffened for a moment, but soon returned to normal. However, he was still shocked. He stared at Xiao Xian and did not withdraw his outstretched hand for a long time. Xiao Xian, who was pushed back a few steps by the recoil, waved his arms and made a hissing sound. He didn't expect it to be so painful. Compared to the feeling of the last punch, the difference was not just a little bit. Xian, Mai said with some difficulty. Ah. Xiao Xian waved his arm and looked at Mai. He was not worried about his arm. Even if it was broken, it would heal in a few days. This was the advantage of the tribesman's physique. You go back, and get ready. Hearing Mai's words, Xiao Xian wondered if Mai would tell him not to come out for 3 days just like Lang Jie did. He continued to look at Mai, waiting for him to continue. Get ready, and go hunting with us next time. Huh. Chapter 38. Xiao Xian looked at Mai in surprise. He did not expect Mai to say something like that. Didn't they agree that he would only be allowed to come with them next time? Why did he change his mind? Was it because of the punch just now? Okay. Xiao Xian answered. Xiao Xian was more than willing to go out with the hunting team next time. The forest changed every day and different things could be seen at different times. For example, there were flowers that only bloomed once a year, and plants that only bore fruit once a year. The earlier they went out, the more they could see. Otherwise, they would have to wait for another year to see the same thing again. Lang Jie and Gu had said that many plants in the forest were dangerous, and they needed to know how to identify them. However, they could only know when they saw them. Otherwise, they would not have the concept based on other people's descriptions. Besides, since Mai allowed Xiao Xian to come with them next time, he obviously recognized Xiao Xian's ability. As for the rest, Xiao Xian only needed to go back and prepare. At this time, someone came in to look for Mai. It was Tua, who they had met before. Knowing that they had something to discuss, Xiao Xian did not want to disturb them, so he left. Uncle Mai, you go ahead. I will go back and prepare. Thank you, Uncle Mai. After Xiao Xian left, Mai moved his stiff palms. He shook his shoulders and swung his arms slightly, which made a series of cracking sounds. Because of Xiao Xian's punch, several bones in his arms were dislocated. However, this shake pushed all the dislocated bones back to their original positions. Although his palms looked fine, Mai knew that there were injuries on his palms. He had underestimated that kid. Mai had planned to comfort and enlighten Xiao Xian so that he could focus on his training. He also planned to give some examples of hunting to Xiao Xian so that he could take him out to hunt next time. However, after feeling Xiao Xian's punch, Mai changed his mind. What did the kid say he was going to prepare? Tua asked. About the next hunting trip, Mai answered. Tua was a little dissatisfied. Didn't he say that sharpening the axe will not delay the work of cutting firewood? I thought he was waiting for the next hunt. Did he come to beg you just now? For the sake of the shaman, Tuo's attitude towards Xiao Xian was not bad. However, he did not want to give in when it came to hunting. The hunting that had just ended was an example. Fei's several serious mistakes during the hunting operation almost implicated the others. Mai shook his head. He didn't mention it. I allowed it. What? Tuo was puzzled. The smile on Mai's face grew wider and wider. Since the blade is almost polished, it's a waste of time to keep sharpening it. Whether it can be sharpened or not, it's impossible to keep cooped up in the tribe. We can only go out and train in the forest. After leaving Mai's residence, Xiao Xian walked briskly down the mountain. Every step he took was huge, but his movement was very small. It looked like he was just floating over the stones. After going down the mountain, Xiao Xian did not immediately go back to his cabin. Caesar went to help the children in the cave to dig out stone worms, so Xiao Xian was not worried. When he came to Old Ku's cabin and was about to shout, he saw the straw curtain at the door being lifted up. An old man with a head full of silver hair strode out. Looking at the old man's face, it was obvious that he was angry. His beard was almost sticking up. Seeing Xiao Xian standing at the door, the old man frowned and looked at Xiao Xian from head to toe. It seemed that he was questioning something. His eyes were like a stone knife that could not wait to cut Xiao Xian a few times. His beard trembled. It seemed that he wanted to say something, but in the end, he only left with a heavy humph. Then he turned around and left. Xiao Xian was confused. Was he a psychopath? Seeing Gu poking his head out at the door, Xiao Xian asked, "Who was that?" After making sure that the old man was far away, Gu laughed and said, "That was Langga's grandfather." "That was Langga's grandfather?" Just as Lang Jie said, he was a bad-tempered old man. Walking into the cabin, Xiao Xian told old Ku that Mai allowed him to go hunting next time. Gu was surprised with his jaw wide open. Old Ku, on the other hand, seemed to have expected this. He replied with a calm face, and let Xiao Xian go into the inner room to polish the hunting stone tools. The stone tools used for hunting were more demanding and time-consuming than the stone tools used for training. Xiao Xian had a lot of stone tools for training but only a few for hunting. Half of them were given to old Ku to trade, and the other specially made ones were given to Lang Jie and Mai. Xiao Xian only had 5 fingers left. Xiao Xian did not say much. He took off his animal skin coat and went into the inner room. Gu looked at the straw curtain hanging there as a partition and smiled. Old Ku wanted to hide the girl and teach her by himself. Old Ku did not allow outsiders to enter the house, but there were always some people like Gu who would enter through the window. Of course, there were also some people that Old Ku could not stop, such as Langga's grandfather. Old Ku wanted to prevent others from snatching Xiao Xian away. "Hey Old Ku, why do you think they allowed Xian to follow the team in advance?" Gu asked. Old Ku did not say anything. "Tisich, if you don't want to answer, then don't answer." Gu walked inside and carefully lifted the straw curtain to look inside. He wanted to see what was different about Xiao Xian compared to before. He could even make Mai, who had always been strict, let him go. After looking for a while, Gu walked back with his chin in his hand. He was shocked as if he saw a carnivore suddenly become a vegetarian. He. Before Gu could say what he had just seen, he saw Old Ku holding a white knife and sharpening it. The word "he" was stuck in his mouth. After a while he stuttered and pointed at the knife that was being sharpened and then at Old Ku. You. There were many marks on the body of this saber and there were also many small gaps on the blade which looked like saw teeth. This was caused by its previous use. The hilt that was installed in the early years was also broken, so it was simply removed. The part of the hilt that was exposed was a part that was integrated with the saber body. The original hilt that was installed on this part of the saber. Ji's eyes were glued to the knife, and he could not return to his senses for a long time. He had already guessed what Old Ku wanted to do. It was also because of this that he was surprised. This was even more shocking than seeing Xiao Xian's totem pattern. When Xiao Xian finished sharpening the stone core and walked out, Old Ku was installing the handle on the knife that had already been sharpened. The handle was installed with a kind of resin which was mixed and melted. Xiao Xian had used this method before. It felt good, much better than wood or rope. "Wait for a moment. You can take it back when the handle is done," Old Ku said to Xiao Xian, who was about to leave. Xiao Xian looked at the knife. The knife was wide and the blade was about 1/2 meter long. The back of the knife was about a finger thick. It was much thicker than many of the stone knives that Xiao Xian had made. Looking at Ji's expression, Xiao Xian knew that this knife was extraordinary. He had never touched the knife, so he could not say anything. However, as he looked at it, he felt a heavy chill coming from the knife, as if it wanted to press people into the ground. What is this? Xiaoxian was puzzled. This is a knife made from the teeth of a ground shell. Gu looked at the knife, his face full of reluctance. He wanted to snatch it and hold it in his arms. This knife had not appeared in front of anyone since Old Ku's leg was broken. He had begged Old Ku countless times before, but Old Ku never agreed. He was not even willing to take it out to sea. But now, Old Ku was going to give this knife, which symbolized his best days, to Xiaoxian. Gu was envious, but he also knew that in his current situation he could only be envious. There was no need to think about anything else. Ground shell? It was a ground shell. Even though Xiaoxian had not seen it with his own eyes, he had heard from Lang Jie that it was a giant ferocious beast that lived underground. When hunting, if you met a ground shell, don't even think about throwing stone spears at it. The only thing you could do was to run away. No one wanted to fight a ground shell because they could not win. He had heard so many hunting stories from Lang Jie, but he had never heard of a hunting team fighting against a ground shell. When Old Ku handed the knife to Xiaoxian and pushed him out of the door, Gu was still craning his neck to look around. His eyes were glued to the knife. Xiaoxian stood outside the house for a long time with the knife in his arms. It was not obvious, but it weighed at least 200 pounds. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.